Dear esteemed donor colleagues from the United Nations agencies and all our partners, I would like to welcome you to the closing event of the first certified joint programs on integrated policy and leaving no one behind. In just over 2 years, and amidst a global pandemic, the Joint SDG Fund proved that strategically directed financing and the partnerships can prove that the Joint SDG Fund, can prove that the strategically directed financing and the partnerships can make significant contributions to accelerating the sustainable development goals. Implementation of the joint programs involved more than 600 partners from governments, civil society, the private sector, and international organizations. In the United Nations system, 15 United Nations agencies, programs, and 2 regional economic commissions also collaborated in the implementation of these initiatives. These partnerships included over 100 integrated policy solutions that facilitated cross-sectoral results at scale. Despite the complexity, all joint programs reported increased United Nations coherence and efficacy and cost effectiveness. Furthermore, 147 million people accessed new or existing social protection services and programs. The fund also catalyzed at least $211 in additional financing to sustain and expand social protection systems, while accelerating the progress on 11 SDGs across 39 countries. The flexibility and the demand-based approach of the fund addressed the specific needs of the diverse countries benefiting from integrated support by United Nations country teams, and proved to be critical in effectively responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. The joint programs contributed to mitigating the socio-economic impact of the pandemic through the provision of immediate social protection support alongside the policy and the capacity development efforts to make social protection programs and systems more shock responsive and build resilience. Through these joint programs on integrated social protection and leaving no one behind, the Joint SDG Fund incentivized the systemic change and innovation, stimulating strategic investments that are accelerating progress towards the SDGs through enhanced collaboration and synergies between United Nations entities in support of policy integration at country level. A final report is being launched with this event. This report showcases key achievements and the bottom-up approaches to improve social protection systems and catalyze the achievement of the SDGs. These resulting lessons learned and best practices can inform further investments, driving continuous innovation and increasing the catalytic impact of the Joint SDG Fund. I encourage all partners to support this momentum and engaging with the Joint SDG Fund, the resident coordinators, and the United Nations country teams in accelerating sustainable development in the way that leaves no one behind. Thank you very much. Over to you, Lisa.
Hao-Liang, thank you so much. And colleagues, I'm delighted to welcome you to this breakthrough event, a long-awaited movement towards our first portfolio of the Joint SDG Fund, its completion, and of course, the showcasing of its life-changing results. My name is Lisa Kerbill. I have the privilege to serve as the head of the Joint SDG Fund. You are warmly welcomed. You are warmly appreciated. Without all the donors, partners, NGOs and private sector partners, resident coordinators, UN country teams, colleagues from across the agency's funds and programs, none of this work would be possible. So first and foremost, a tribute and sincere appreciation to all of you. Just a quick rundown of our time together today. We're going to be starting with a video. We're going to be heading over to the Joint SDG Fund's head of programs, Ned Rava, who's going to give us a real snapshot of that global report that is being simultaneously launched today. And then we're going to have two sort of cutting edge panels, if you will. One that's going to combine both our colleagues from the field, two of our resident coordinators, as well as three of our critical leaders across the ILO, across UNICEF and UNDP. As you know, colleagues, the nature of this fund is the joint in our name, and that means that all of this work is bringing all of those agencies, funds, and programs together where it matters most to really fight that vulnerability and to make change. So very excited to have you with us, very excited for us to make sure that we are laying the groundwork for the global accelerator for social protection and jobs, and other windows of the Joint SDG Fund, as well as all the great bilateral work that's being led by the agencies. So it's an exciting time. Without further ado, I hand over to the video. I don't have sound, colleagues, but I don't know if others do.
No, no sound.
Cannot hear sound.
You could share the video with other materials, so apologies for that.
So colleagues, we will share the video with full volume and sound for you to enjoy later. And now I hand over to Ned Rava for highlights of this amazing work. Ned, over to you. And Ned, an absolute tribute to you for taking this from the beginning in 2019 to today. So really sincere appreciation. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And this is maybe it's too strong to say, but an end of an era, because it really started this first portfolio when the whole Joint SDG Fund was being designed still. So the portfolio was continuously being changed as the fund was changing, and they kind of cross-fertilized. But really, this is the result of an effort that included literally thousands of people. I will present only just some basic information. And we will be having further discussion in the panel, and then in the second part with more technical discussion. Just to say that we will share the report. It's still being formatted, so everything a bit last minute, as it always been on this portfolio, but eventually successful. So I can just put it on the large screen. Yeah. So we will share the report in the coming days. So it's done. But still needs some beautifying for wider sharing. So okay, can you move to the next slide and also make it wide? Yeah, we see only. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. No, it's still. Okay, maybe it's easier if I share on my end. Okay, so colleagues, just a second. Apologies for the technical difficulties. So basically, this report has been a final step in closing the portfolio, which started basically 4 years ago with some initial discussions with a number of colleagues in basically how this whole fund would be operating. So this is the very first portfolio. It informed other portfolios, but it also was changing as the fund was improving and innovating. We invested $69 million, but the total budget was $101 million because of the cost sharing, mostly by the agencies involved. We received 114 applications. That was a bit of a surprise because we were basically, I think, 3 or 4 months old as a fund. We applied very robust process. So we came up with 35 joint programs, which were purely based on the quality. We were lucky, we didn't apply any criteria, but we were lucky that actually the regional distribution was almost perfect, reflecting the number of UN country teams per region. And you can see a lot of logos below. These are all the UN entities, including 2 regional economic commissions that will participate. So we embodied the twin mandate of the UN Joint SDG Fund, which is to work on the SDGs. Because of the integrated nature of this portfolio, we cut across 11 of the SDGs, but of course the focus was on SDG 1.3 on universal social protection. And as an instrument to support the UN Development System reform, which just to remind all of us, started at the same time when we were launching this portfolio, we helped boost the UN country team coherence under RC leadership and really foster joint work, leverage comparative advantages, and reduce duplication transaction costs. The portfolio was very, very diverse. I will get to this in a second, but you can see some of the highlights on the left, including shock response social protection, which was a bit of a novelty, but then as the pandemic continued, really cut across all joint programs that we supported. And we really developed partnerships. So there is a count of over 600 local partners, local national partners that were involved in the implementation. This final global report was a result of a long collaborative and iterative efforts, including support from several colleagues from our UN partnering agencies. And special thanks to Patrick Breard, who put the report together, and Maya Marquez, who was coordinating the overall process. So basically, when we started, we were in a bit of an uncharted territory. We knew that social protection has the potential to be an SDG accelerator, and we knew that joint programs should serve the broader UN development system reform. However, we did not know how the decentralized design of these joint programs will produce the actual portfolio. So a year after, we had a midterm review, and this is the reconstructed theory of change of the portfolio. I'm not going to get into this, of course, you will have it in the report as well, but it just shows the robustness of this portfolio and how we anticipated the kind of the move, the drive from more kind of operational activities all the way to the implementation and acceleration of the SDGs, including these arrows that come from the ILO broader theory of change. Now, the first focus was on social protection. There's plenty of data. We actually took some time to prepare this report because we just had so much information and data insights from the joint programs final reports. But one thing that stands out is certainly the total count of at least 147 million people benefiting from this portfolio. And as this was also on, addressing the most vulnerable, the special focus was on children, pregnant women, older persons. So you have some numbers there as well. There are all different kinds of entry points of how our country colleagues intervened into the system to transform it. Because we never prescribed the approach. We gave them a kind of a design challenge to work with the government and other partners to really figure out how they can transform social protection systems within really 2.5 years. So it was either policy or institutional innovation combined with fiscal space and new partnerships, or really going in depth into redesign, strengthening of programs, delivery, access, and quality of social protection. However, there was also the other focus of the portfolio, which was on leaving no one behind. We wanted to support, of course, the universal social protection floors, but also to pay particular attention to those experiencing vulnerability. One highlight is that we mainstreamed from the very beginning, from the very first step, human rights mechanisms and involvement of human rights institutions in the overall program cycle. You have some information on the slide here. Of course, there is a whole section in the report, but this was we could even say that this portfolio was also a portfolio on human rights. And then we also supported data on LNOB, and there was as well special focus on persons with disabilities. Total count is 4 million people benefiting, but there was also other kinds of results. For instance, in countries like Georgia, that was working on genuine transformation of the overall system to ensure inclusivity of PWDs. On gender, again, another thing that we really emphasized from the very beginning, we also had the DCO design for us a very special, innovative gender marker. It was really an advanced version of the gender markers because it didn't include only budgetary allocation. So we tested it out, it worked well, we improved it. And of course, now this is this informed the broader work on gender marker for the whole system. But gender was really in the focus of, some countries had 100% focus on gender, some had it in the mix. One particular emphasis that I believe is also important for the Global Accelerator is this focus on the domestic work, care systems, which we supported substantively throughout. Now, I'm not going to go into the results. I'm just showing these slides to again emphasize the wealth of results and insights and changes that happen in all different kind of contexts. But we had a diverse portfolio, which combined all different kinds of access, leverage points for systemic change. But all of this were really looking to break down the silos and not work on one particular group without addressing multi-sectoral issues, or working on multi-sectoral issues without paying particular attention to the most vulnerable. Unfortunately, the joint programs were launched at the very same moment when the global pandemic started. So that was a bit of a risk, and joint programs really responded well, but it was also an opportunity. So we reacted immediately and provided an opportunity to all joint programs to repurpose 20% of their budgets, and 1/3 did that. However, within the next couple of months, all joint programs adopted, because our policy as the Joint SDG Fund is not rigidity in implementation, but in contrast to ensure adaptability, agility, and maintenance of the strategic focus. So these are some of the examples of what the joint programs have been doing. And this also then informed the socioeconomic response plans later in the year. But we started really early, and that proved to be a good decision. We also tried to work on the learning and knowledge management emerging practices. It was a light approach because we didn't want to invest too much and focus on the country level. However, one of the main lessons learned from this portfolio is that we need much more technical support from the design of joint programs throughout the implementation, and that will include also more robust learning systems, which we are now considering in the new thematic windows. But just to emphasize that the global report on UN collaboration social protection really featured the case studies from this portfolio. I believe probably up to 80% of all examples came from the portfolio. We did establish and facilitated several peer learning communities, which were very appreciated by everyone involved. And our country colleagues did an amazing job in producing communication content, interest stories, human interest stories, emerging practices, strategic documents. I put here over 300 blog posts. I think we are still counting, but probably the total number is closer to 500. So in terms of the way forward, what does this all mean? We are closing joint programs, but of course, on the basis of the very design of these joint programs, we expected them to catalyze further change. So joint programs are continuing, whether it's funding and financing or follow-up projects or further scaling up of the results. And of course, this portfolio also provided the basis for the new 6 joint programs, for instance, in MCO Samoa, or some of the development emergency joint programs, for instance, in Turkmenistan. But the most important, of course, follow-up is the contribution that this portfolio has made and will be made into the Global Accelerator, including that most of the, well, we don't know, the consultations are still ongoing, but many Pathfinder countries will probably come from this portfolio. However, as Lisa already mentioned, and this is not only social protection, due to diversity and really wide scope of this portfolio, there were contribution to other what we call key SDG transformations, future thematic windows of the joint SDG fund. So we also supported food systems, for instance, in Rwanda. Digital transformation was in the focus of half of the joint programs, but for instance, Chile was 100% pure digital transformation for elderly. And then we worked on SDG localization in almost all joint programs, but Albania is a good example where it supported integration of social protection and healthcare services at the municipal level. So thank you very much. This was really an effort of literally thousands of people involved. And while we celebrate this success, we are also looking forward to what comes after this portfolio. Thank you very much. Over to you, Lisa.
Well, thank you so much. And again, really echoing the congratulations and the appreciation for the hundreds of colleagues who've made these remarkable results possible, working together across UN country teams, really demonstrating the UN development system reform in action, the role of the resident coordinator, and of course, all with government ownership and leadership. It's notable as we sit here in December 2022 to remember that this was all happening in the context of the COVID-19 global pandemic. And so much of this work was going on in the midst of that response. So it is quite remarkable that we're now looking at this as a foundational element for what we hope will only be more and more expansion and going to scale these programs. I think showcasing not only the design, but the implementation and the impact is really a proud moment for all of us. And we really hope that in this panel discussion now, we can really be sort of showcasing even more of the specifics of how each of the agencies feels that they had, their best efforts reflected and brought to the issues, as well as what lessons we can take forward. So without further ado, the idea is that across these 5 esteemed panelists, we would have 3 colleagues first, sort of from global perspective of the agencies, and that is Shara Razavi, Director of Social Protection at the ILO, Natalia Winder-Rossi, Director of Social Policy at UNICEF, and Nathalie Milbach-Boucher, Head Officer in Charge of Inclusive Growth at UNDP. And the idea is that we would talk to these 3 colleagues at that global perspective across these agencies, and then move on to our 2 esteemed resident coordinators. So really, now that I'm looking at my panelists, we know that Hao Liang, our Assistant Secretary General of UNDP, he was citing some of the grim realities of extreme poverty, reminding us for the first time, a generation of at least 75 million more people will be living under $2 a day, essentially. And as always, children and women disproportionately affected with all the missed opportunities that comes from that poverty, right? Lack of education, loss of jobs, persistently unpaid domestic work, all the impacts of domestic violence, etc. So I'd like to maybe start with Shara, and then I can pass to Natalia and Nathalie. If you could help situate our discussion this morning by your views on the transformative role of social protection and what you think we as the UN family have learned around social protection during this crisis, and a little bit around the joint programming. When you think about the portfolio that you've helped build that we're showcasing today, can you think of any examples of how it contributed to the reform of the UN development system, but also to SDG acceleration? So Shara, I'll pass to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And it's great to be sharing the panel with my esteemed colleagues, Natalia and Nathalie. And a big salute and a big congratulations to Ned for the real great effort. And we all share, your joy. It's obviously a lot of, your life and work was put into this, but we really also are so grateful for the effort that was done. So let me just try and say, maybe first just to say that I think the lack of UN collaboration and divergent views among UN agencies can really be an impediment also to the member states that we're serving. And I'm sure our resident coordinators will have much more to say about that. And this kind of, not being on the same page can really both reflect and contribute to lack of coordination within national governments. But conversely, and this is where I think the effort of the joint program really comes in very strongly, where development partners, social protection interventions are really on the same page and well coordinated, as in the case of, I think, many of the joint programs that we're discussing today. It's also easier to strengthen the coherence of the national social protection systems and policies. So I think that's a first point that I'd just like to say. And maybe then building on that to say that building social protection systems that are rights-based is in a way, you know, the hallmark of the UN approach to social protection. It's kind of our common framework. And I think this is not something that we only take from the standards, it's also something that has to be done on the ground. And the fact and practice of having joint programs was really, you know, the laboratory in which this was done. So, you know, what do we mean by this? I mean, saying rights-based, and I don't have time to go into details, but let me just say that the key principles that we have around universality, around non-discrimination, around adequacy and predictability of benefits, you know, these are not just words, they're not just empty words. They're really quite powerful tools that when we speak in one voice and act in one voice at the national level, can also really resonate with policymakers who can use these kind of principles to ensure that everyone has their human right to social security realized as it's set out in our international standards, including very importantly, the work that the joint programs did very consciously from the beginning in terms of closing the gender-based coverage and adequacy gaps. You know, it's a long-term project. It's not something we can do in a few years, but I think it's important to have that really built into the DNA of the work that we do. And finally, I'm conscious of time here, Lisa. In addition, I think, to being a human right, and this is really to address the question about how it addresses all the SDGs, social protection in a way is also a gateway to many other rights and SDGs, you know, beyond the targets that are specifically on social protection. There are, you know, very well documented pathways through which social protection triggers very positive virtuous circles in terms of individual health and well-being outcomes across the life cycle, including in the context of population aging, which is a reality everywhere, but also improving workers' productivity and employability, lowering recruitment costs and enterprise productivity at the meso level, and reducing inequalities. And this is a really big issue now. And preventing poverty in this moment that we're in now, reducing inequalities, both horizontal and vertical, and really being those automatic stabilizers with multiplier effects that we need, particularly at this moment when we have so many issues in terms of the economic system and economic recovery. And really, this is my last point. The last point to say is when governments are able to really build a well-governed social protection system, and as we saw from the slides that Ned shared, so much of this work on the joint programs was about building the systems, you know, making sure the data is there, the MIS systems are functioning, that people can access the benefits that they have. All of this is what makes a social protection system something that everyone can count on when they need it, and it kind of nurtures public trust in it. And this is what brings the state closer to the people and can really be the factor that can repair the frayed social contract that we have at this moment of time, which is really ripping our societies apart. And so it can contribute to that social peace and political stability as well that we very much need at this moment. So let me stop here and hand over to you, Lisa.
So that was fantastic, and you not only sort of reminded me of the orchestra that we, the UN family, must be, right? The different notes that we each take up to government partners, but if we don't play that together with a conductor that has one rhythm or one melody, it can be very confusing. It can be very daunting for government, right? Because they're hearing one thing from one part of the UN passionately and, you know, with all the data, but then another piece of data might be presented, and if it's not woven together, how do we in fact have that coherent messaging? And then how does government decide, right? I think that race to get it done instead of getting it, you know, moving together has been really the challenge I find, and I'm really pleased the way you presented it. You know, the virtuous circles and this gateway to the SDGs. I mean, just a beautiful, eloquent way to start us off. So thank you so much. Natalia, passing to you for perspectives from UNICEF. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Good morning, afternoon. Very excited to be here at the end of the year when we're all, running around with putting out fires, but really having the opportunity to reflect on a very exciting path. Really humbled by the presentation that Ned just shared with us, to see the power and the impact of joint work and the results delivered. Sometimes we just see some pieces, but having it in that comprehensive way, really, at least for me, showcase how much we can do when we align our forces, when we come together for the greater good, if I can say that. And also thanks for the opportunity for sharing some thought from our side. I think we're in a very critical moment for the work on social protection. I think many of us have been working in this sector for many years. And I think it's been in the last 2 or 3 that there's a different way or narrative around how we see and how we put forth social protection, right? That it's not just for a specific part of the population that of course is critical for the extreme poor, but not only, that it's not seen just as an emergency response, but something that needs to be part of an inclusive growth and inclusive recovery strategy. And I think that's something that, the different crises highlighted, but also the kinds of responses that we were able to see, many of them channels with the support of the SDG Fund, which I think this is a very important element. There were a lot of questions whether governments are able to respond timely, whether governments are able to provide, the most effective support in times of crises, whether the UN can talk to each other and provide a comprehensive approach. And I think we've showed in many of the countries where we've seen the kinds of responses that we were able to adjust, that we were able to come together, and that we were able to prioritize what was needed. And putting our service and an expertise and leveraging that specific expertise. Those notes, I really like that, Lisa, those specific notes to have a perfect harmony. I think the fact that the first window of the SDG Fund was dedicated to social protection was definitely no coincidence. I think it was showing the recognition of the impact, but also the need that we needed to have a much more of a push, of a catalytic way of really making sure that some of the innovation that we saw country level was done at scale, was very context specific, and force us a little bit to talk more to each other and to appreciate how bringing together expertise from a technical but also from a operational perspective could make a huge difference. I think it was also critical that the fund was able to foster innovation. And I think this is something that it's not always seen when we have different sources of funding, that, it was flexible. It really helped countries to show, this is the moment to do something differently. I'm going to use this catalytic push to also see if we can do specific proof of context and allowing us to make changes to respond to COVID, because at the beginning that was not what was intended. But I think we had also, and I think that was very strategic from SDG Fund management to say, okay, yes, this is a very particular context, and we're okay to also adjusting the design and adjusting the implementation for a very critical context. And this is why I think it has been so catalytic and effective, because it was flexible, it proved innovation, it helped us to bring us together. And for me, it was a game changer in that respect. And I think that's also have helped in a demonstrated effect that even though maybe not every single program is perfect, but it definitely had opened a pathway towards a very interesting, sustainable way of working. And maybe just a couple of examples. I think from the beginning, since UNICEF have been working on social protection, we've been talking about systems. That has been our mantra for forever, since the first framework thousands of years ago. But the idea of systems started to lose momentum. We were only focused in one particular program, or the idea of cash. And this fund helped us to bring back the importance of having connected sectors, to having deliver systems that work, to making sure that it's not about one program, but a set of interventions that can address the multiple vulnerabilities of different populations. And I think that was it's important. Systems is not a word that is sexy, it's not a word that is always able to bring resources, because it's not easy to unpack. But the results, again, this catalytic work was able to provide, I think, change the narrative of the importance, but also why we needed to invest, not in short-term responses, but in system building. And systems that are inclusive, systems that are focusing on a variety of programs, systems that are shock responsive and risk informed. And again, I think that was a very game changer in that respect. And definitely, we still need to do many more. I think it's definitely that, there's still a road to be walked, but we definitely have a very strong starting point to build from that, and I know countries are waiting to continue with that path and to build from the very important lessons and the impacts that we saw thanks to this support. So let me stop here. Thanks so much, Lisa.
You know, Natalia, you remind me that you kind of highlight the way there's been a new neural pathway developed for how the UN agencies, funds, and programs can work together, right? That we are going to be catalytic, we are going to be innovative, we are going to make sure it's around the systems. And my hope is that we never go back, that this is the new way of doing business, because it is showing such it's reaping such benefits of the investment. It is being catalytic, it is making a difference. And as we start to look forward to this global accelerator on social protection and job creation, imagine if we can now look back at any of these countries, make them pathfinder countries, and then really see this foundational work. I think it's really quite, you know, when you talk about connecting the sectors, it's interesting, right? We in the UN need to connect. We need to connect the sectors in government. I mean, there's just a lot of great takeaways. And I know experts like you, Natalia, you've been in the field, you've been doing this like so many. It really means a lot when you start to see that this is a way forward, because it's not unique to social protection what the fund is trying to do. We're going to try to do the same thing on food systems. Food systems are related to a component of what social protection tries to do vis-a-vis nutrition and access to food security. So there's so many lessons that I hope we can also bring more colleagues around the table for this report. Natalie, over to you. This exciting, it's just very, very enthusiastic for me too.
No, it's very exciting, and actually a lot has been said already, and working closely with our colleagues from ILO and UNICEF, and looking forward to the global accelerator. I think all the points were so made were so critical. Just to go one step back, I mean, if we look a little bit to the global context and the role that social protection can play, and the way we are looking now at social protection, you know, as a game changer, I think it's important to see that, I don't know, at least that's what I perceive, is that globally, countries clearly are not yet fully well equipped, you know, to deal with all the challenges that we are facing, those cascading crises. Obviously, shocks, uncertainties will be the new reality in the future. And what we see is that still globally, there are persisting tensions, you know, between short-term needs for security and shock mitigation, and the long-term needs for prevention and structural transformation. And based on what has been said, and looking at the tremendous work and achievements of the programs on the ground, what I can see is that clearly social protection building, moving towards universal, inclusive, gender, shock responsive social protection system can be a game changer in connecting and in reconciling those tensions. So that's something which is really important if we think of social protection from a forward-looking perspective. And on this, again, I can definitely, I was looking at some of the lessons learned, and it's clear, and it takes us back to the importance of national ownership and leadership, the political commitment and momentum that we collectively need to build in the countries we are serving, you know, to move the needle towards universal social protection, to leave no one behind. And it's encouraging to see that through the joint programs, really, we were able in many of them to convey coherent messages, you know, to governments, and keep this momentum and build the commitment and the engagement. So this is definitely something we need to pursue, and clearly, why being also responsive to, and that's a point I would like to make here, perhaps, bearing in mind that countries need to be in the driving seat. We can influence, we can be proactive, and policy coherence is clear, but countries need to be in the driving seat for this progress on social protection. And we need also to acknowledge that there is not a single pathway towards what we want to achieve. And actually looking at the broad spectrum of all the joint programs, we can see that there are many different entry points through which we can move towards transformation in the area of social protection. That's one point I wanted to make here. The second one, and looking at all the tremendous work we did together for UNEP, we've been involved in about 18 programs. If I'm not mistaken, I feel really that this window of the Joint Fund has served as a real incubator for the next phase, you know, and what we are looking at, especially through the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transitions, you know, obviously based on the lessons learned through the joint programs and what we have been able to build already, there is definitely, for me, scope for going even further, you know, in terms of integrating social protection with other policies to ensure that no one is left behind, while possibly maximizing also co-benefits for other SDGs and systemic impact. And on this, I would like to emphasize the importance of leveraging social protection systems also to address the key challenges related to energy transitions. And that's an important entry point for the Global Accelerator and navigating the impacts of climate change. So this means that, and it was fantastic to see that most of the joint programs have been able to bring together a wide range of stakeholders from the government, but also outside the government. But obviously, that's something we need to look at, like the constituencies around social protection, taking into account the social, economic, and potentially also the environmental sustainability benefits of social protection would need to bring around the table even a broader range of partners. So that's really something where I see an opportunity, and there is scope to build on the solid basis that's been put in place by the fund, and that's all. This is obviously, and as mentioned, at the heart of the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transitions. You know, how do we reconcile all this, and how social protection cannot be seen in a vacuum, and that's an important point, and that's what we are looking at as UNEP, like promoting, you know, integrated approaches, which are in our DNA, as everybody knows. But if we look at our recent research, for instance, and modeling on the SDG push, we see that basically those are like a set of integrated investment in social protection, but also in governance, in green transition, in digitalization, that could make the difference and change the trajectories on poverty reduction and the reduction of inequalities. So that's really something we as UNDP looking forward to engage in through the Global Accelerator and I believe future joint programs. Last but not least, while we are moving ahead, I mean, this notion of bearing in mind that we need to leave no one behind and critically to reach out to the furthest behind. I think especially the reaching out to the furthest behind, I think that's something we need to look at a little bit more in a more granular manner. Actually issues such as intersectionality, you know, when we think about leaving no one behind, reaching the furthest behind, you know, how do social protection systems are really catering for the multiple needs of people facing intersecting source of discrimination, exclusion, and so forth. It was amazing to see that the joint programs collectively contributed to reach out to so many women, children, persons with disability. But how do they cater for people who are facing multiple deprivation? And UNDP, of course, we are keen on engaging with other agency also in building the evidence on these multiple deprivation and social protection needs. So those are just little flags on where we see opportunities to advance this critical agenda through the Global Accelerator, and we have like weekly discussions virtually on that with colleagues from ILO and UNICEF, and through the channel of the Joint SDG Fund, the New Window. And again, the fact that social protection is meant to be also an important component of other windows of the next round is very important, because it again speaks to this notion of integrating social protection and making social protection play its catalytic role around various development priorities, including on the green side of the Sustainable Development Agenda. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Natalie, thank you so much. And I loved your reminding us of the link to the green and just transitions. Just earlier today, the Secretary General's Climate Advisor, Selman Hart, addressed all the resident coordinators specifically on COP27, plans for COP28, and of course the Loss and Damage Fund, and really how resident coordinators and UN country teams already need to start sort of reflecting, analyzing, and reviewing the opportunities for how to link that in with cooperation frameworks and government priorities. And it's exactly your point. I mean, how are we going to be looking at something like loss and damage as we look at green jobs? And what does that mean for the most vulnerable, right? Who are, of course, affected because of the damage done by climate change. And so none of this can be siloed yet again. This has to be integrated. And the fund is meant to be that. The fund is meant to take the global transformations necessary to reach the SDGs and give the funding, you know, to the country teams to get it done. And I think let's keep pushing the envelope and forcing ourselves to grapple with this, because they really are the critical issues. Thank you so much, Shara, Natalia, and Natalie. I wish we had more time, because I feel that this is a master class. We're in a master class from gurus on social protection. Now we're gonna pivot over to where the magic really happens, which is in the field. I'm delighted to welcome Allegra, who is our resident coordinator in Costa Rica, as well as Stephen, who is our resident coordinator in Kenya, just to really hear how they see it. You know, if we're the winds, the trombones, and the percussionists, you know, where do Allegra and Stephen see themselves as maestros, so to speak? You know, how can we really benefit from the role of RCs, which is really what the reform is trying to do, right? To give government that ambassadorial presence in the field. So Allegra, if you'll kick us off, I'm very welcome to hear your views, and then we can pass over to Stephen. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for making Costa Rica part of this journey. It is a masterclass, I agree, and for the field, for us to hear the theorists and to see where we are actually so connected. So I actually wanted to start off with some of the points Natalie made, which is, leave no one behind, starting from the furthest left behind first. Actually, I had that in my notes, because we always forget that second part. I often say it in Costa Rica. And I think this is what we were able to do with our Joint SDG program, and absolutely look at the intersectionality. So I know one of the things we want to highlight through this panel is also impact. And I want to talk about impact, very real impact we were able to have. Look, in the entry point was women, but it was women in their intersectionality. So it was indigenous women, Afro-descendant women, rural women, coastal women, and adapting and understanding what the different needs were, but also how programming and how institutions, including the UN, need to go to people. If we say people-centered, that means that we're the ones who have to change. We're the ones who have to adapt. And the second, I think, is also, it's not a one-off. And this is something, you know, we've learned also through our social protection work. It's not enough to say, here's the money, you know, or here's the loan, or here's the opportunity. It is a process. And we had 2 years of a joint program, but we're actually still going. And just yesterday, I was with the minister, talking about how can we still go based on what we've learned. So there's very real impact at the people level, which is what the SDG is calling for, people, women, families, communities, but also, and that's where the UN, I think, had this great benefit that we work at the ground. We are at the ground level with the people, and then taking that proof of concept and taking it to the technical level within ministries, shifting mindsets and approaches, and then going up to the policy. So sitting with the minister and saying, okay, what do we learn and how do we shift our policy, our systems, the way we register people, the way we take them through pathways. I think, Shara, you mentioned pathways. It's so important that this is about lifting people out, not only maintaining people in their status. And I think there's a lot of learning on that. So very real impact here, as I said. And then maybe I wanted to speak quickly to the point that many of you have raised is how does it connect to the SDGs, but how does it connect also to the common agenda and the transformations we're looking at? We ran innovation labs. We supported digitalization of the actual system where people are registered. We looked obviously at the food system because we were working in one part, we were looking at rural women. And so what are their practices? How can we make sure that they're environmentally sustainable? So there is SDG cutting across this, and there is also the different transformations and the future windows. So I think I believe that with our joint program, we were able to already build the catalysts that will help us continue this work through the different windows. And regardless of if we make it to the joint SDG program or not, it is now actually on our cooperation framework, because we signed a cooperation framework in October, and we're able to put the different transformations in the cooperation framework and what we had learned from this process. Maybe my last point, which is the reform. Absolutely, it's an orchestra. We're the conductor. I really personally engaged with this joint SDG program, going to the field, meeting the women, talking to them. And I think, and I've said this in a previous panel, I think the best of what I've seen is UN agencies reaching out to each other. They were brought together around a joint SDG program. They learned about each other, actually. That was the first thing is, oh, now I know what you do. Now I know what your expertise is. And we can work together better as a team. And I've heard these same agencies not only becoming champions of joint programming. Yes, Allegra, please find more, because that's the best of us. It's the best of us. But also taking the money away, still reaching out to each other. So even now that as they follow up maybe within their own mandates or portfolios, knowing that there is this other expertise across the room and reaching out to them and continuing to bring each other in. So absolutely, this is about the UN working together at its best. I'll stop here, Lisa. Thank you.
Allegra, as always, eloquent, articulate, and concise. I think I love the way you already underlined the interconnectivity with food systems, with digitalization, with innovation, because obviously the thematic priorities that the Deputy Secretary General has chosen for the fund going forward over the next 2 to 3 years are very much those. And I hope that everyone on this call is already starting to think very holistically about how indeed those pathways from social protection can be catalytic for that effort. We don't want there to be limitations or hurdles between these windows helping one another. Quite the contrary, just the way we don't want government ministries to be, in any way limited in how they're engaging. So really great reflections. I'm sure there will be questions that will come in for you, so all of you can sort of be keeping an eye on the chat, and those will have. But Stephen, I'm delighted to pass to you, not only for your previous role in Gabon, where you also were a friend and ally of the fund, but now in beautiful Kenya. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and a great honor to be part of this masterclass, as so many of you have put it. And as always, to speak straight after my great friend, Allegra. So let me pick up from where she left off. The Joint SDG Fund is of massive importance to the UN development system reforms and to us resident coordinators. So if there are any donor partners on the line with money and they're wondering where to put it, this is where to put it, because it helps us as resident should we call ourselves resident conductors now, Lisa? It helps us to drive and incentivize that joined up programming, that coherence that we're all searching for to deliver scale and impact, and particularly acceleration. And I wanted to come to this point and illustrate it through social protection that Shahra was making about the gateway, the pathway, I would say the super highway. We've all seen these, bird's nest diagrams of how the 17 SDGs mutually interlock. So how do you find a shortcut, an accelerated path through that complexity? And that's what the Joint SDG Fund makes us do as UN country teams on the ground. Think hard about what is that shortcut. And social protection, I think, was an absolute act of genius to choose that as the first window. And so, yeah, let me give you two very quick concrete examples. I was involved in the inception of the joint program on social protection under the fund in Gabon when I was resident coordinator there. And I've been involved in the final stages of the social protection joint program for Kenya. And in both, I think it really helped us to come together around one of these super highways for the SDGs. So in Gabon, we were really proud of, I think, being able to print, for once in our lives, print a very simple theory of change on a metaphorical t-shirt. It was this: Gabon is an upper middle income country. It's comparatively wealthy. It has, therefore, a pretty effective social protection safety net called the CNAMGES, which covers 90% of people in Gabon. Well, who are the other 10%? They're indigenous people, they're migrants, they're undocumented, they're the rural marginalized. If you don't have a birth cert, you can't get a national identity card. If you can't get a national identity card, you can't take part in the social protection safety net. If you can't do that, you miss out on education and health, and then you miss out all through your life on the other 15 SDGs. So reverse that. Give people birth certs, get them national ID cards, get them onto CNAMGES, and then everything flows from there. The results, 30,000, almost 31,000 undocumented citizens now have had birth certs issued to them under this program. That may not sound like very much, but it's about 1.3% of the total population of Gabon, or about 12% of all of the undocumented in the country as a whole, 12% of the caseload. That means 18,000 children and parents so far now enrolled in the CNAMGES. The government has picked this up and is now proceeding to do the remainder of the caseload. So it's a really major achievement. It's a really major accelerator for the SDGs in Gabon. And it was particularly, this point about intersectionality again, it was particularly reaching out to the furthest most left behind. And it had that catalytic effect of getting people into the safety net and then getting government to continue the work. So I think it's something to be very proud of. Here in Kenya, similar but different, assisting Kenya's move towards establishing a universal social protection system. So Kenya is a lower middle income country, is a little bit behind that and has a much larger population to deal with. So helping Kenya to develop an enhanced single registry. We've been able, in fact, to leverage, it's almost a blasphemous thing to say, leverage this drought, because the major drought emergency that Kenya is facing, we've been able to use cash transfer, bring more and more Kenyans onto the hunger safety net, and then combine that database with the national social protection database. So you're bringing more and more people into the fold. So we're moving from 12% of the population in amongst the most vulnerable to 36 and onwards from there. So I really, and I want to be very brief, Lisa, so we can leave plenty of time for discussion, but I think, again, the genius of choosing social protection as the first of the windows for this revolutionary joint SDG fund, because it really did lend itself in two quite different contexts, Kenya and Gabon, to identifying one of these super highways for the SDGs. Both of them, in our case, were about access to government social protection systems. I think many other flavors that one could have highlighted, but really, therefore, a ringing example of how you can accelerate through that thicket of the SDGs, how you can do it through social protection, and how a fund like the Joint SDG Fund can really empower resident coordinators and the country teams that we lead to deliver on that promise. So thanks so much.
Fantastic, Stephen. It's interesting when you mentioned the blasphemy of how the critical nature of the drought presented an opportunity. I mean, arguably so did the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, the conversations that governments had to host in real time as the world was shutting down, as access to services were being blocked for so many, it really did underscore, that vulnerability. And now we've got, the elderly that were homebound before, but now they're homebound when no one can go to visit them because everyone's under quarantine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So I think there were many ways that I think COVID forced this role of RCs into a much more critical space. And I think you're using another great example, which is these recurring climate emergencies, which naturally was reminding us about. I mean, if we're starting to see more and more internally displaced persons, not only because of conflict, but because of climate, again, and another window of the Joint SDG Fund, because we're having more and more, displaced because of climate emergencies. So really, really fascinating. I want to make sure that we don't miss an opportunity to take questions from our audience, so to speak, our members of the masterclass, our students in the masterclass. I don't know if Maya or Ned are helping us see those.
Yes, so we didn't have questions in the chat, but I believe there's all panelists made their introductory notes, probably going further than what we asked them. But there's also, I think, another guiding question that we could move into, mostly focusing on how all this portfolio relates to the next steps. So by looking back, looking further and forward to the follow-up to this portfolio at different levels, but also the Windows Global Accelerator and so forth.
That's fantastic, Ned. So maybe we'll go through our colleagues and just in the same order. Is that all right, Shara? We'll start with you, and we can just move the ball along and really just have some more reflections. So over to you, Shara. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, it was great to hear Allegra and Stephen, because it really, I think it just made things really very concrete and very lively. And let me just pick up on some of the points that were made about the highways. Now, I think that in a way, absolutely, I think the social protection responses during COVID, and in particular, the joint, SDG fund, having had the genius, as you said, of having had the program on social protection as its first call, I think all of this has really raised expectations that the gaps in the universal social protection systems that we have can be closed, and that they must be closed, because I think there's much more consciousness now about the fact that all countries need to have a system, a social protection system that's in place when we have a climate-related crisis or a pandemic or whatever. So there is, I think, much greater kind of consensus, if I can say, at the global level about the importance of building those systems in every country, even low-income countries, in anticipation of these multiple crises that we have. But I kind of also want to really sort of bring home the point that the alarm bell that the pandemic rung about the urgency of investing in social protection, and we all heard that this is, an investment, and it's an investment with many different payoffs. I feel that that alarm bell is now really being muffled and quietened because of this fiscal constraints that countries are facing, and the international financial institutions are also, advising countries. We hear about it, about different countries being told to cut, on this and to cut on other areas and subsidies here and not expand, because there's a worry about not there being enough fiscal space and so forth. So I think in this context, the point that we had made, and which is also very clear now in the accelerator around financing, becomes absolutely critical. And here, I think that effort to really talk to all across ministries, and I think, Stephen and Allegra can attest to this, it's a difficult conversation to have. Ministries of finance are not always accessible, but I think we really need, through the next window that we have and through the accelerator, really reinforce through this financing issue the importance of bringing in and talking to not only the ministries of finance and planning, and we have UNDP to help us with that, but also really to have that sort of UN system being able to also work more closely with the international financial institutions. And I think we need the powerful governments to come and put money in the in the joint SDG fund as a new window on the accelerator, but also they have a voice in the international financial institutions. And I think they need to also speak about the importance of investments in social protection. You know, you cannot do much about climate change, whether it's in terms of adaptation or mitigation, if you don't have a social protection system that can make sure that those transitions are inclusive, that people can rely on unemployment benefits while they're retraining to be recruited, you know, into the new emerging sectors and away from, you know, the brown sectors. So a social protection system is the lubricant, is the enabler of the kind of transitions that we need to make as a result of climate change. And the other point I really wanted to make, Lisa, here is the initiative of the Global Accelerator and the Joint SDG Fund window are really coming at precisely the right moment to help us build on the experience of the past decade, including the lessons from the 35 joint programs of the first portfolio. But one thought I really want to leave all of you with is that, you know, doing social protection system work is not something you do in 1 or 2 years. It's a long-term kind of investment, and you have to be there and you have to continue investing. It requires long-term work and commitment, and it's important that our joint programs have this kind of longer-term vision, while of course trying to identify entry points and interventions that can move the needle in the short term. But our donors have to also understand that and be patient with that, I think, and be there, you know, for the long haul. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
No, such a great set of reflections, Shara. And I know you at ILO, I mean, Beate and team in New York at ILO are already helping plan an event around the Global Accelerator for April. There is a lot of engagement now with the generous member states who want to show leadership in this arena, that they want to build on the foundations, not only the member states already in the fund, but those who are seeking now to amplify and build out further with the Global Accelerator. So I think another example of where we need to be singing on the same song sheet, right? And we need to really test our willpower, so to speak, to not be going bilaterally to those member states, but to say we would rather have it through this window. We want this together. And I really think, you know, having ILO, UNICEF, UNDP, the RCs on this call it's not for design purposes. It's not for showcasing. This is the reality of how we're seeing it getting done. And I really think that is some of the proof positive of what we're trying to take forward. Natalia, over to you for some other reflections. Thanks.
Thanks, Lisa. And of course, it's very much aligned with what Shara was saying. I think we've been reflecting throughout this and last year on, you know, what is next. No, we have a momentum, we have a lot of excitement, we have a lot of progress, but I think the multiple crises were also very clear that we still have a lot of gaps in the system. We still have, you know, coverage which is not adequate, you know, in terms of what we look at. For example, only 1 in 4 children have access to any form of child benefit, for instance, or in terms of adequacy, that we still struggle to have, you know, proper transfer sizes or proper design to really see impacts on some populations. Of course, financing, which is the gap that we see, which, yes, we saw that many countries were very quick to support programs during COVID, but then now we're seeing a lot of risk of those programs being reversed or not seen as something that needs to be continuously supported and not just as a one-time perspective, with some exemptions, but it's, you know, gaps also in terms of the importance of having a risk-informed design every time that we're thinking about social protection system, that's not just an add-on or something that should be thought as an afterthought, but a critical part of good programming. So, and also that even though, yes, cash and income security is critical, and I was one of the, I guess, effective instruments of social protection, there's many other elements of a social protection system that are equally relevant, but that need to continue to also be strengthened in terms of health insurance, in terms of unemployment benefits, in terms of the care agenda, accessible childcare, many other components, which in this particular crisis were proven to be as important as having, you know, an income specific support. And I think there's still a lot of elements that we need to put on the table. And I think that the approach or the added value of the accelerator was also to put those elements on the table, to make sure that we took advantage of this momentum around social protection, but also to see it as its contribution to the broader challenges that we're facing. As I think it was Natalie that was saying, not to see it as something isolated, but as part of the broader strategies that we have at country level. If we want to have a climate adaptation strategy, it needs to have a very important inclusive lens. If we want to have a trade growth strategy? What are the elements that are going to make sure that that strategy is also supporting and benefiting the most vulnerable, and those that really want to be more actively part of society? I think we do have a very important role in terms of leveraging also our expertise around public finance, and to what extent we can help governments to, one, protect at a minimum the social spending and the social allocations that they've done for social protection. And I think many of us have been working in that area and are really trying to link our technical design work on social protection, but also the linkages that we can have with the different ministries of finance and IFIs. Making sure that we enhance the financial credibility of social protection sectors, helping them to show that they can use their resources, that they are efficiently allocating resources, that they are transparently also allocating and using resources in the same way, and in that way enhancing, let's say, their case vis-a-vis the finance ministries. What also helping them to identify, what are the best financing options to really reach the scale that we want to see. Last week, I was in Zambia with gathering a set of more than 25 African countries in what we call the community of practice of cash. And I think it was very humbling to see that there is a strong recognition among governments about two things. One, that this is a long-term investment, as Shara mentioned, and that there are champions that are putting on the table the importance of not just one-time commitment, but a long-term. And that it's feasible, that you don't need to have, a perfect growth or to be in high levels of income growth to be able to decide that social protection is one of your priority investments. And we need to gather the champions in our UN agencies, but also those government champions that have made that realization that this is a critical pillar and a critical strategy for their sustainable inclusive growth. And I think that's our idea of our Pathfinder countries, but also the overall push that we need, and many of the governments have been supporting from the development side, but also from those countries that have, even with very small and constrained fiscal space, prioritized social protection, given how much they've seen in terms of potential for future growth and human capital. And the road is, the pathway continues, but I think I want to think, and I'm optimistic that we are in the good track moving forward. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Natalia. I think your intervention reminds me there's been so much discussion about the austerity measures that are being reviewed by governments, given the Ukraine crisis, given the demands of the humanitarian sector, right? The Ukraine war is literally pulling so much from so many of the partners that we need globally. And I think, making the case, despite the context that we face post-COVID, persistent Ukraine without resolution, we fear in 2022, how do we continue to make that investment case? And how do we continue to show the interlinkages with those other sectors, which are also a priority, which are also what was discussed at COP, which are also part of, as we look forward to, SDG moments 2023, et cetera. So yeah, I think this masterclass has to go much louder and broader, and it has to go to the spring meetings in DC and beyond, right, Shara, to your point around the IFIs. Natalie, over to you.
So much has been said, and it's good to see that we are all speaking with the same voice. It shows that obviously we are identifying the key challenges, but also the opportunities where they are. I would just like to piggyback on what Stephen was mentioning, like in terms of highways. I would like just to nuance that the highways, of course, captures this notion of acceleration. But obviously, from what we hear is that there might be multiple lanes on the highways, and the highways are not necessarily straight. So that's the point I want to make again, to emphasize the need for us to be responsive to the diversity of the country context we are facing. And honestly, I think there was a point in the report about the humanitarian development nexus. What does this move towards universal social protection means for countries affected by crisis, conflicts, protracted displacement situations? How do we reconcile the massive investments in short-term humanitarian assistance with the transformative changes we want to see on social protection system? I think those are also important considerations we need to keep in mind. Also, from the viewpoint of leaving no one behind, and clearly to reaching to the furthest behind here. We are talking about people with disability, children, but what about IDPs? What about refugees? What about, I mean, those are things we need probably to keep in the corner of our mind. I think one of the probing questions was about the key challenges, and I think colleagues already mentioned, we see two big things, basically: institutional capacities to move ahead, fiscal constraints, funding, and of course, on the top of everything, like political commitments. When it comes to the funding, and I don't like the word funding, financing. Financing is a better word, I think, and that's what we are talking about, especially in the context of the Global Accelerator, which has also developed a roadmap regarding financing, and I would like just to underscore the importance of the work that is going on, with the development of integrated national financing framework that can serve as a window to really try to tie up, better align public-private financing, but also planning and budgeting processes with the SDGs at large and the national priorities for jobs, social protection, and even now, of course, green transitions and so forth. And it's very important. And that's one of the value of the Global Accelerator, and we discussed this already, of making sure that we are not looking at integration only from a sectoral perspective, but making sure that integrated strategies we want to promote are fully backed up by consistent financing strategies, and that's really something we need to work on. Just to also elaborate a bit on what Shara was saying, I remember, because we've been facing crisis, since 2008-9 and before, the financial crisis had put the social protection agenda back on the table, then the food price crisis, and so forth. And I remember I was in Africa at the time, working on resilience in the Sahel, and so what do we need to do to convince government to invest in social protection, in a sustainable manner, in a structural manner, not simply thinking about quick fixes, because that's the mindset we need to work on, how to move from quick fixes. I was mentioning this at the beginning of this conversation, the short-sightedness when we are looking at social protection from just a shock mitigation perspective, short-term security angle, to something more transformative and with a greater emphasis on prevention. And I remember that, we need to make the business case for social protection. And on this, it's not only about talking about, it's really putting figures, dollars, whatever, on the benefits of investment in social protection. I think that's something we need perhaps to invest more, reinvest in, and to say, well, if you don't invest today in social protection, that's a liability, a long-term liability for your budget. And by how much? And I think what we did at some point, I think in Cambodia, maybe, was really to look at the impact, for instance, that the expansion of the cash transfer for the poor had on employment, on GDP growth, and so forth. And I think we need to get a little bit more into this. We all know about the social benefits for health, education, that can also bring long-term benefits for growth and so forth. But I think we need more immediate, ready-made evidence to convince the Ministry of Finance. Again, 54 countries right now are facing soaring debt levels. So that's really something we need to think of. Now, looking at the future, of course, I think both Allegra and Stefan and colleagues mentioned about innovation. Again, and how can innovation be leveraged, in the context of on this highway towards universal social protection and inclusive social protection, we need to be mindful, and UNDP has invested a lot, you know, in digital capacity, and we are really ready to work with colleagues on leveraging all the benefits that digital solutions can bring in terms of improving efficiency, accountability, inclusiveness. And we also need to think again from this viewpoint of leaving no one behind, no country behind, about both also the risk attached to innovation, and, you know, including in terms of inclusiveness, and whether, you know, we are talking about the digital divide. And I think it's something that needs to be really kept in the corner of our minds when we are thinking about all that, even if we have obviously promising approaches in the context of shocks. Obviously, if we want to reach out to the furthest behind, we all know also need to look at alternative means to reach out to the furthest behind. And those might not be high tech, those might be simply using the business as usual modality. So just to think it's important to remain open-minded to on this, and agile and really sensitive to the national context, including the political economies, because that's something also that needs to be taken care of when we want to move the needle towards this important agenda. I will stop here. Thanks again for the opportunity. It's so inspiring, actually.
No, it is. It's so motivating as well. I loved your reference to the highway, because I was thinking, you know, we think about this journey and we think about these milestones. We're all on this journey to 2030. And earlier, you know, Stephen had said, you know, what's the shortcut? And I think because of the desperate situation, because of this vulnerability, because of exactly those you're mentioning, from refugees to IDPs to those living with disabilities, there is no time to wait. So how do we match the urgency of reaching them with the fact that this is a long-term solution, right? Which was also highlighted. So you have these two almost, you know, you have a paradox of how quickly can we get there? And yet this has to be foundational. It has to have systems in place. It has to be driven by data. It has to be about fiscal space and leveraging. So yeah, really. And I loved your linkage to digital as well. I mean, we always, what meeting aren't we in where we don't say private sector, we must bring in the private sector. I mean, it's sort of it's like an automated talking point, I feel, amongst so many of us. Digital is a space that we don't own. And I think, you know, thinking about LDC 5, you know, this will be in Doha in March. What are we really doing to ensure that we are bringing the private sector into these conversations is also, you know, digital's a prime example, at least in my mind, for that. And how do we make sure that we get that right as the UN and not go individually, yet again, to those partners, to have a logo, to have a moment, but yet not to really wrestle with the issue properly. So yeah, well noted. Allegra, we'll pass over to you for more inspiration and more reflections. Thanks.
Well, first of all, this continues to be a masterclass. Thank you. And I actually really happy to see alignment. I hear you say things that I hear ourselves saying here. So colleagues, there is alignment between headquarters and field, which is great. Because my first point was actually going to be on investment, and many of you mentioned it. In many meetings, we actually said, no, this is not a cost, this is an investment, and let's change the narrative. And I also obviously had the point of private sector. I mean, Costa Rica is a country under incredible debt burden, with a very limited fiscal space, with inflation, with, you know, stagnating poverty. And it is, you know, it's under IMF right now. They have an IMF framework. And what has been very useful, and it speaks, I think, to Sharon, what you mentioned, is actually we are online with IMF and with World Bank to say, whatever happens, however you decide, you know, to manage your debt, you're not going to touch. So you shouldn't, please don't touch whatever, you know, social protection and that kind of spending. And every time there's been a conversation in the government or in assembly to say, oh, let's go and cut over there, you know, all partners have come back and said, please, you know, are you sure this is an investment? This is your future. This is how you get out of some of these situations. So I think that is fundamental. I'm sorry, Lisa, I am going to say we should bring in the private sector. Absolutely. I mean, we are recently having conversations like, guys, it's beyond ODA. We cannot keep thinking ODA. And I think if any of us are following the conversation that the African leaders are having in Washington yesterday and today, that's also the message that's coming from them. You know, this is not sustainable. We need to look at different, you know, motors of growth, and it cannot be the kind of the cooperation, the ODA, the bilateral, multilateral. So I think that's fundamental. My second point, I think it's also come up, interinstitutional. And that's one of the impacts we've made, one of the lessons we've learned, and one of the, you know, what we were able to show the government of Costa Rica, which by the way has incredible systems, but in some cases have not been effective because they haven't been interinstitutional. And so bringing the different systems together, just yesterday, the minister was telling me, you know, we mapped out, we have 33 programs that benefit women, all separate, none of them talking to each other. So we have a woman that actually needs to knock at 33 doors trying to figure out who will, you know, be able to support her. And so how do we switch that around and bring, you know, the person at the center and organize the pathways around her through this interinstitutional coordination? And absolutely, and Natalie, I repeat this, intersectionality. We serve the people, we adapt to the people. As with something as simple, which was one of the feedbacks we got here, is the form that I receive from, you know, the fund or the institution for me to get a benefit. I don't understand this form. I don't know how to fill out this form. You know, this is not culturally appropriate to me. And so how do we change that around? And my last point, which is, you know, the reform, and obviously, and I absolutely agree. And as Stephen said, if you have $1 to spend it on the Joint SDG fund, but not only because it strengthens the RC. That's the byproduct. Strengthening the RC is the byproduct of this is the best of the UN. You know, this is what agencies themselves are learning and seeing, that they cannot go at it alone, and that day of my mandate, this is me, this is my offer is gone because governments don't see it anymore. I see here governments more and more wanting to go beyond the offer of that one agency because they know that there's expertise in other agencies, whether it's locally, regional, or even globally. So they don't say, agency, please help me. They say, I need this, I need support in this. How can the system organize itself to help me? Because they've now seen that we are a system that comes together, connects, and brings different parts, leverages, harnesses, different parts to offer that solution. And so more and more, and this is exactly what happened yesterday, they came to me and said, Allegra, this is what we need help with. You pull together the system. And so this is, I think, where the biggest investment comes from, is actually the system working together. And then, of course, also supporting the leadership of the RC. But I really want this to be seen as a consequence and offering a kind of a whole of UN, which in turn empowers the RC. Thank you again.
Yeah, fantastic, Allegra. And I think, you know, examples of the way government is coming to grips with these challenges, some of the demands they're feeling, the pressure points that they feel, and how can we as a UN system actually begin to alleviate that and to make it an opportunity, and, you know, to be able to activate, you know, the non-resident agencies that may be on the line today, bring in expertise and lessons learned. One of the questions in the chat about, you know, how can we replicate, how can we take this to LDCs? I think that's another huge part of the community of practice that this is built. I mean, Ned and all of you have fostered conversations regionally, globally. I mean, there's been so much phenomenal learning. So really, I think all to be taken forward. Stephen, you have the floor. There is a question specifically for you because you are in Kenya. Did you see it that you were in Gabon?
Yes.
Yeah, from Paranitsa. So really happy to have your reflections on that and others. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks a million. And really, the masterclass continues. So yeah, I have 4 points to make, and 2 of them relate to the question put to me in the chat by Paramita, for which many thanks. The question was, how can one replicate these kinds of examples to 2 kinds of contexts? One, she asked about India being a very population-dense country, and the other being climate-impacted LDCs. So the first point about a dense country, a population dense country like India, I think goes straight to Natalie's point about really being attentive and flexible around country context. Gabon actually, in a funny way, is not dissimilar, I think, from India, except in terms of the scale, of course, because it is very, very urbanized and then also very rural at the same time. And so part of addressing the Leave No One Behind challenge is on the one hand to look at these very dense concentrations of population in urban centers and look at who's missed there, the undocumented, the migrants. And on the other hand, look at the very other end of the spectrum in the most rural areas, who is being left behind out of the social protection safety net. And that turned out in Gabon to be the indigenous in particular. So I think there's a lot of sort of mutual learning there about the geographies of being left behind, if I can put it that way. When it comes to the questions of climate impact, well, that comes to your point back to me, Lisa, that I had forgotten also to mention COVID. It is such a cliche, isn't it, that crisis is opportunity, but what these successive crises are, the pandemic in particular, but also the impact of the climate emergency. In ways, they're X-rays on the societies that we serve that reveal fractures in society, fractures in our safety nets, fractures in our institutions, fractures in our coverage. And so I think one of the learnings for us, we didn't know that we were launching a social protection joint program on the eve of the greatest pandemic that the world has ever known. But it gave us an opportunity to learn through that lens, both in Gabon and then here in Kenya, where again, the sort of emergency safety nets that had to be put in place, then the challenge was, okay, how does one integrate them into the long term of social protection in the life of the societies that we're serving? And I think there is real learning there for climate impacted countries as we go forward. Third point then is about governance, actually. One of the things, not being an expert myself, as I've probably revealed, in the social protection domain, one of the surprises to me was actually how popular social protection can become with the host governments that we're serving, particularly when, again, we're able to use the joint programs that the joint SDG fund helped us create, when we're able to use those joint programs to show these kinds of shortcuts, these kinds of accelerators that can also not only be programmatically and socially impactful, but can actually be politically popular. And so that was part of the story I had neglected to mention on Gabon, that actually the number of birth certs ultimately issued as a result of the program was actually 10 times as many as was originally targeted under the joint program. And that was really because the government got behind it and said, we like this. And it was politically popular, politically interesting, politically useful to do. My final point, really, Allegra has made more eloquently than I will. You shouldn't fund the joint SDG fund just to help out poor old resident coordinators. That's not the point at all. If we go with that metaphor of the UN as orchestra, and with us as maybe the conductors, then our only job, you said byproduct, Allegra, I'm going to say sort of waypoint on the journey. What we're looking for is accelerated, scaled up, joined up impact. And that the SDGs, because it's a circle, because there are 17 of them, because they're mutually supportive, they demand whole of system efforts. That's why we need joint programming. And so that's what the RC post the reforms is supposed to be about, helping to catalyze and encourage and cajole into existence. And the fund really helps us to do that. I do think, go back to what I said before, that social protection was a brilliant choice as the first window, because it really did offer us these interesting different superhighways. But I think that there are many more, and I'm just really excited to see what these new windows are going to deliver. I can't wait to be part of that conversation in 2 to 3 years' time, 5 years' time, to see what we've reaped from the new windows under the fund. So thanks.
Thank you, Steve.
Fantastic, Stephen. And I just love your ability to kind of bring so many different points together like that. So indeed a maestro, indeed a maestro. So I believe my role is now to pass to Ned after thanking this masterclass. We have to start charging for these, right? We have to take this on the road. There has to be something we can do to make this a resource mobilization strategy as well. But really, really hats off to our RCs who, you know, just kind of exemplify so much of the team that we have on the ground and that energy and optimism. Okay, byproduct sounds, I don't know, it just sounds like a leftover, but I love leftovers actually. They always taste better the next day. So I don't know, we'll come up with the metaphor, but and Sharon, Natalia, and Natalie also, you know, you represent these agencies and all of these teams around the world, and you know, the real getting it done. So real hats off to all of you. What a great motivating conversation. Ned, I'm going to hand over to you. I think my role is done until we come back from the breakout rooms. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you very much, everyone who contributed to this panel. This was really, really exciting. And you know, the energy created now, you know, is raising expectations. So we need to move, you know, forward and really, you know, make this whole energy keep the momentum. However, for the second part of our today's event, we will actually have a bit more of the looking back, also looking forward. But in a sense that we are going to go into more technical discussions, which means 6 specific thematic breakout rooms. This reflects to some extent the structure of the report, which, to be completely frank, was quite a challenge for all of us involved. Because there are so many ways, you know, one can cut the pie on social protection, especially when you add the LNOB as well. So whether we look at from this side or that side, so these 6 actually reflect our best efforts to communicate the complexity and diversity of this portfolio. So we are going to go into breakout rooms. Each room, you will be able to select the rooms yourself. Each room will have 2 moderators from 2 UN partnering agencies, and there will be 1 case study, 1 joint program presented. So the team from the country level will present the joint program, brief case studies, some, you know, PowerPoint presentations, and then there will be discussion about the specific issue. So we will have 40 minutes instead of 50, so we are decreasing it a bit to end on time. And then one of the moderators of these breakout rooms will have a short report back to the plenary, and then we have the closing. So I think, yes, so you can see I hope there is a pop-up window which tells you to choose a room, and then just to know automatically, as usually, then the rooms will be closed after 40 minutes. You'll still be brought, you know, back to the plenary. So do enjoy. This is going to be more technical discussion, zooming into one country, zooming into one topic. But you know, please contribute and keep the momentum going. Thank you. Yes, you can see the rooms just when you scroll down, and then you just join any of the rooms, and I suppose you will be able to switch different rooms if needed. And let's make sure that we have enough people in each room. I mean, you didn't want to assign this, we let you do that yourself, but okay, it seems so far gender, no one is interested in gender. Okay, so we have 1 person in gender. Human rights, very popular. Of course, social protection, decent jobs, children, expanding social protection. Oh, okay, gender is being populated. Okay, great. So see you in 40 minutes.
Hi, Ned. May I just jump in very quickly?
Yes, please.
Okay, if you have not seen the pop-up box, if you look at your bottom toolbar next to reactions, there's an icon with 4 little boxes that says breakout rooms. If you click on it, you will then see all the rooms and you could just assign yourself to one of them.
Thanks, Liz. We still have 40 colleagues in the plenary, so please join one of the breakout rooms. I mean, you don't need to, you can stay in the plenary, but you're losing on the discussions that are happening already now.
I cannot see them.
So under, yeah, as Liz explained, you have, next to the leave button, you have more, and then it says breakout rooms. I mean, there should have been a pop-out window. So can you go to more and then click on the breakout rooms and then scroll down to join? Can you see it?
No, that's the point. I don't see it on my screen. I have the leave button, and actually I'm supposed to go, but I wanted just to attend for a few minutes, but
as they call it. And now I see that a few people are coming in. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining this session. We just thought we can do a quick round of introduction, given that there are so few people joining this room for now. But now, if the numbers become more, maybe Namrata, in any case, you can start introducing yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Veronica. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see some of you and connect in this breakout session. So my name is Namrata Saraugi, and I work as a social policy specialist at UNICEF in New York, focusing specifically on social protection financing. And I'll be with Veronica today, moderating the session on coverage and financing.
And Nicole, do you also quickly want to introduce yourself, and then we can...
Sure, no problem. My name's Nicole Khan. I'm head of program for World Food Program here in Malawi, and we were the convening agency for the joint program.
Excellent, thank you. So just to give you a quick overview of the session, we will start with an overall conceptual framing of social protection extension and financing issues as it was addressed across the 35 programs of the first portfolio. Before we then turn to the concrete country case study, so to say, of Malawi, where Nicole will present to us the specific achievements of the program in Malawi. So Namrata is going to give the overview. Please, I guess you will share your screen, right?
Yes, 1 second, just...
And just to say what Namrata will be presenting will also be, this is part of what is included in the overall report of the joint SDG fund first portfolio that is launched also today. So you can also read it up in that report.
Great. Thanks, Veronica, for setting the stage, and hello, everyone. So today, just as Veronica mentioned, just wanted to mention of the work that's been done on social protection coverage and financing under the joint SDG fund. So I'm not going to, we've introduced ourselves. So basically, in terms of expanding social protection coverage, and I think Ned also mentioned about this in his slide in the session early today, that as part of the fund, there were 147 million additional people who benefited from the joint SDG investment fund, including from new and extended access to social protection benefits. And there were, of the 35 joint programs, 26 countries focused on enhancing the adequacy of benefits. There are about 29 countries who focusing on extending social protection coverage, either legal or effective or both. And there are about 30 countries who are focusing on improving comprehensiveness of the social protection programs. And the approach, there were two ways of focusing on this. One is through the development of policy and legal frameworks. And I think that's the foundation of developing or strengthening social protection systems, as they act as a lever to ensure sustainability of the systems and ensure predictability in the delivery of the systems. So as an example, for example, in Uzbekistan, the program supported the development of a draft national strategy for social protection with measures to improve social assistance schemes, social insurance, and access to people who faced multiple barriers when seeking employment, to labor market policies and social care services, followed by a costed action plan and options for financing fiscal space that also sets the foundation for working towards implementing social protection programs. And then the second strategy is more focusing on strengthening the implementation mechanism. So while, of course, it's critical to ensure that we have the foundation in terms of the policy frameworks, ultimately it's about how do we strengthen implementation mechanisms. And this chart basically gives an idea of what are the focus areas that the countries did in order to strengthen implementation mechanisms, in terms of either working on accessing, strengthening data management systems, working on social registries, trying to improve communications and outreach, and improving access to delivery payment mechanisms, grievance redressal mechanism, etc. And the second component of this was obviously on social protection financing. So there were 32 countries that carried out specific activities to strengthen social protection financing. So if you'd see, the majority of the work was around producing costing and feasibility analysis to make a case for investing in social protection policies. Then there was a lot of work around improved efficiency in terms of management of social protection programs, then improving the effectiveness, what's the value of money in spending for social protection, and then of course working more on the political side and approving a bill or a law to increasing the fiscal space for the social protection. So this is broadly just an overview of what the program did. And now, just as a segue, we'll move on to a specific example in case of Malawi, where they'll show about the work that has happened. And I'll hand over to Nicole for her presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Namrata. Nicole, please, you can immediately go ahead. Are you sharing your screen as well yourself for showing the slides, Nicole?
Thanks. I was just going to share the screen. I seem to be having a bit of an issue sharing it at the moment.
Okay,
I think you've got the copy.
I think I also
Would you
have
mind
it. I
sharing
can
it for
open it
me?
also. Sure, no problem at all.
That'd be great. Thanks. Sorry, little tech glitch. Thank you.
I'm just taking 1 minute to open it, but you can maybe start.
No problem. Well, why don't I just start? I hope you can all hear me okay. So in Malawi, we had the
Yeah.
Nicole, I don't know, is everyone able to hear Nicole, or is it just me? I just wanted to check.
I thought it was my problem because as I started screen sharing, it seemed my system crashed, but I couldn't hear her either.
Yeah, Nicole, yeah, I think.
I'm really sorry, but yeah, I think we need to start from the beginning again because it seemed like nobody was able to hear you, Nicole. So let's start again.
Apologies for that. It was clear at the start and then seemed to go. Okay, before I continue or start again, actually, my colleague Santiago is on the line from the Resident Coordinator's Office for a few introductory words, and then I'll go through the presentation. Santiago?
Hi, everybody. Sorry if it's a bit dark. Just realized it's, yeah, almost 6 p.m. in Malawi. And you know, I just want to take part of this presentation a little bit to set the tone and put you a little bit on context of Malawi and where this program falls. And a couple of two initial points are important. I would say that, you know, relevant to highlight that Malawi is one of the 33 African LDCs, and lately Malawi has been playing a very active role as chair of the group of the LDCs. But Malawi is also actively participating in voluntary national reviews, basically, you know, assessing strategies to accelerate the SDGs. And, you know, I'm saying this because I wanted to highlight that there is a strong institutional commitment towards the agenda. And actually, the recently launched Malawi Vision 2063, which is the long-term development vision of the country, it's strongly aligned with SDGs, and the first year implementation agenda of that plan is you know, strongly aligned. So there's huge commitment. And another important point to raise is that Malawi is a country prone to shocks and emergencies, floods, droughts, food insecurity, you name it. And of course, some exacerbating due to the climate crisis. There are well-developed policies in the social protection sector. And this program helped shape somehow those policies. And factually, social protection is one of the most key areas for the government in Malawi. However, most of the stakeholders would agree that despite having well-developed policies, there are strong challenges in the implementation of those policies. And Nicole will, you know, take you a little bit deep on that. And then a bit of context on the program. The UN in Malawi has been lately strongly invested in joint programming. And 3 of the joint programs that we have been recently implemented are supported by the Joint SDG Fund, including this one. So the fund has been instrumental in helping us improve joint programming, but also in advancing strategic agendas in which perhaps without the support of the fund, we might have not been able to enter. And also to mention that, or acknowledge that the Joint SDG Fund is walking the talk on the UN reform by enabling RCs and RC offices leadership in shaping and implementing critical agendas as social protection. Let me stop there with a little bit of introduction, and let me hand over to Nicole, who will take you to the core of this.
Excellent. Let me just thank you so much, Santiago, for coming in and setting the scene. And yes, Nicole, please come in.
Great. Okay, thanks, Santiago. I hope my sound is better now. Trying to get the kinks out there while Santiago was talking. Okay, so it's a 2-year implementation of the project from 2020 to 2021. Interesting timing with how it did coincide with COVID. 3 agencies were involved: ILO, UNICEF, and WFP, with WFP as the convening agency. Now, this was in support of the Malawi National Social Support Program, MNSSP2, to realize its goals, and the 3 components were aligned with pillars of the government-led program. So basically, we were looking at how we could build on what already existed, but also keeping in mind what Santiago was talking about, in a country that has both chronic challenges, chronic poverty, chronic food insecurity, as well as regular shocks. How we could adapt the social protection systems in existence to make it more operational, and also to adapt to meet humanitarian needs. So the joint SDG fund in Malawi did provide catalytic funding to support this, basically. So the existing investments, but also how we could expand social protection and make it more systematic in the approach. And as it says in front of you there, to reduce the vulnerability of those most at risk of food insecurity. And we had 3 main components, as I said. Yeah, perfect. So the first one, we're looking at the component one, which was led by WFP, when the program was developed, like Santiago was saying, there's well-developed policy documents, but the actual implementation faced a number of challenges. So those, with all the shocks that happen, those furthest behind were in need of additional support, particularly during the sort of cyclical hungry season, but also in terms of sudden onset shocks. The responses to shocks were really driven and met by the humanitarian systems. And so this is utilizing parallel systems when we do have a government-led system in place. So how can we then look at how we can strengthen these systems to be able to utilize them for humanitarian assistance? How can we make that connection? So this became one of the key focus areas for this project, and how we could fast track that model. You can go to the next slide. So the big achievement here was that the joint project was able to provide a basis for adapting the Malawian social protection system to be able to respond in times of shocks. And this is via different interventions. So one of the key things was that we have here is, when it comes to the social protection systems, is we have the Unified Beneficiary Registry, which is the government-led beneficiary registration system. And there's been some challenges, but really we supported in rolling this out and operationalizing it. And as an example, from a WFP perspective, we actually have utilized this when we've been doing our own direct implementation of our own food assistance programs. We've had the COVID urban intervention as well, which was targeting the main urban centers with cash transfers following COVID. And it was definitely an example of where the three agencies, following this kind of bringing together under the joint program, worked closely together to be able to implement in a new sphere of working. And then on top of that, rolling out the emergency information system for the sort of cyclical responses that we're facing. So
all products that we deliver and all products that we are delivering was always revised by the ministry. So we keep a close relationship. And also, I guess here it was important to have a technical coordination that was not really part of the agency, have a contract with UNICEF, but was not there as staff, but to technical coordinate the project. And also with the COVID and with this kind of political position, when we face a lot of budget restriction. So in important moments, we have the blocked enrollment of new municipalities. So the government did not accept new municipalities to join. So it was quite difficult because our main goal was to do the opposite. So we navigate through doing a lot of advocacy, but also partnerships and network support, because we work together with an ad hoc group of Happy Child program donors. Besides the UN system, we also have a lot of foundations working together with the ministry about this topic, but also the World Bank. So we try to keep a connected approach with them. And also we had a national early childhood network that was really important to keep this at the agenda, and an important work of the legislative that we keep in track with all the political sensitivity of not oppositioning one power to another, but it was also important to reach out from those supporters. And as way forward and to finalize, we do have this online platform going on that's kind of a more substantial and keep the project finalized, but the online platform is available, and all courses and knowledge projects that we deliver keep it's part of the ministry products. We also do have some agencies bilateral projects, especially UNICEF and UNDP already had some projects with the ministry, specifically with the Happy Child program. So in a way, we are talking about the same people of technical staff that were working together, and so all the knowledge, internal knowledge, keeps going on through those bilateral projects. And especially we have a new government beginning on January, and it's a government that is more traditional, have a more traditional and comprehensive approach regarding social protection. So we hope we can address this topic with navigate better through this topic, especially because we are also discussing a new cooperation framework, and we have draft outcomes. And so far we have a specific draft outcome regarding social protection. So it could be a way to give a more intersectional approach inside the UN to this work also. So I stop here. I just want to have to give to you this link. I will not play there because it's 20 minutes, but it's a really beautiful documentary. I saw a lot of documentaries of the UN work through my professional life, but this is really a beautiful one. I suggest you all to see after our session. Thank you.
Wow, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you so much. If you could take off the screen, maybe we could go back to our room. Welcome, Ned, Maya, Deca. Thanks for joining. We were just listening from Samantha from Brazil team, Resident Coordinator Office, on their support to Happy Child program. And when this topic came up, talking with Ned and Maya, which country will be best, immediately they said, well, Brazil. Team Brazil, they've got a real cool program, and I'm really very much convinced of why that was such an immediate choice, because of the scale that you reach 1.6 million, I think. How you integrated policy. This is a portfolio on social protection, but integrated policy. Right? So how you brought together cash transfers with home visits and communication material, also the gender issue. That was really interesting. And these technological innovation you mentioned about the chatbot, in the e-learning courses, how you adapted, that all sounds so fabulous. And your presentation that was on time and so clear on the results and all the aspects, that was really appreciated. So thank you, Samantha. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We've got 15 more minutes. I have a lot of questions, but I have a few questions that can start, and then colleagues, please just jump in. You can either type your questions in the chat box, or you could unmute yourself and come in with a question, or raise your hand virtually, or with this, or just flag us anyway, so that you can ask questions. I think there are a lot to learn from this. One thing I was curious was the UN collaboration. So you were touching a little bit about how it worked. I think you mentioned about UNICEF, UNDP, UN Women was also made below. So it looks like it was a very comprehensive program with different UN agencies coming in. Could you explain a little bit how these UN collaboration actually worked in practice? Any lessons learned, any tips of how these agencies came together for support?
Actually, I can start saying that from our colleagues that were part of the program, they said that it was the best experience on a joint program so far. So kudos for the joint SDG fund, because Nenad and Maya were always clear about our questions. We have always clear guidance, and I guess I believe this make a huge difference when we're also as RCO guiding the process. So we had a work plan that was thought about and designed together, but more than that, we work in a way that almost each product was delivered by 2 or more agencies. So we did not split the budget, and each agency did something. We always keep everything on loop, everyone on loop, to share ideas or to share the products or get feedback. So this was a thing that we keep up during the entire joint program. But more than that, sometimes, for instance, one agent did an analysis, and then after that, another agent kept that, read an analysis and delivered the online course. So not necessarily the product that the final products always came back from the initial ones, even though they were not being delivered by its own agency. So this was really interesting to see. Well, for instance, I mentioned UN Women with this survey on refugees and migrants, but this is also made together with UNICEF, because both of the agencies have a common work on the humanitarian side on about the Venezuelan refugees. That is another other topic, but since they already work together in that area, they were able to work together on the same topic, also from the joint SDG fund. So we delivered this kind of trying to see how, possibilities to do things together, and not just programmatic, but also at the operational level. We do have kind of a local shared services center that was one pilot project before this name even exists. And we did a lot of process using this shared center, and try to use LTAs from one agency to the other in order to be more effective. And also, as lesson learned, I strongly advise to have a technical coordinator, because she was the one that was looking for our activities and seeing possibilities to coordinate works. And that is not really, it's a person just to the joint program, not with a lot of conflicting agendas. And also, I believe that the support of the RCO also it's important, because when we have to navigate through those difficult political topics, that this is the moment that the RCO, it is important in order to not give this kind of false idea that one agency could be being benefited if they leads this kind of difficult negotiation. So I also think that it's make a difference from previous experiences.
Excellent. Yeah, it sounds like all of the key elements of joint work at the operational level, at programmatic level, but also with global support and RCO support was all in place. That's Maya, I'm sure you're smiling listening to how great this coordination worked, and with great support from the fund. Yes, exactly.
It's
and
not
I was
always
on the
easy. It's not always easy because we don't have a corporative culture of working that way. So that's all why I think the joint SDG fund is also so important, because if we want to go in the direction of more coordinated work, we need more coordinated funding. So the quarterly reports also make us to think about, oh, perhaps we should move our courses. So it took a lot of work, but it was worth it, because we need to take a moment to think about how we're delivering the program.
Excellent. Maya, you can open your champagne. It's like a great moment to celebrate. That was such a great word. We've got a few more minutes left. Let me pause here to see if there were any questions from any other colleagues in the room.
Maybe if I may.
I think Louisa, sorry, Maya. Louisa, you wanted to come in, then maybe Maya, you go next. Louisa, did you want to come in? Sorry, I just saw her unmuted.
Thanks, Samantha. It was a great presentation, and congratulations to the whole team in Brazil for doing this amazing initiative. that seemed like it was a lot of work at multiple levels of the government. And it looked like it was a truly successful model. So congratulations on that. And I did want to ask a specific question because you did mention in the beginning slide about Raquel, who has encephalitis, I think you said, and it was more about, was the program, were any adjustments made for children with disabilities in terms of the home visiting? Was there any special curriculum that was developed or referral pathways to support children with disabilities within the program? So that was just my one question.
Great question. Yeah, I had that question also. Just if we could hold on. Maya, did you want to come in with your question, then we can take it together? Samantha. Maya, did you want to come in?
Thank you. Yes, so I just wanted to ask something a little bit more as well in the lines of what Luisa mentioned, and going a bit broader and beyond the example of Brazil, and just to see globally the situation of children and social protection. I think we've seen that a lot of the social assistance, social protection benefits are going through families with children, and that really helped a lot in the response to the COVID-19 crisis. Are we seeing any institutionalization of such programs, and how are they really helping families and families with children remain out of poverty? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Great question, Maya. So one on disability, second on how these support programs are being institutionalized, especially those ones that are introduced during COVID, I think. So Samantha, back to you for these questions.
Okay. Regarding people with disability, my quite one answer will be more or less, because the program do support children with disability. The second photo that I had on the presentation was from Melissa. She has Down syndrome. So it was also one of our stories from the field, but it was not quite a focus when we wrote down the project. So we are including from a lack of knowledge from the UNCT in Brazil on this topic. So it's quite common or evident to think about gender, or to think about pregnant women, and think about indigenous population, and think about refugees. It's not quite so common to think about people with disabilities. But this is changing since the beginning. When we write down the project, from now, we now have a working group on that topic. We have ILO leading this topic, so it's quite different. And I'm pretty sure it will be different if we stop to write down the project right now. But so in the sense, we do not deliver a specific knowledge product regarding how to reach people with disability. We're more focused on people incarcerated and refugees and migrants, but also because the government itself has a lot of capacity to deal with people with disabilities. So the government, especially this last government, was pretty focused on people with disabilities. So it's quite also, in a way, our program was main focus to support the government and a social protection system that already exists. So we try to figure out which groups were being left behind. And people with disabilities were covered by the national team. So this kind of more or less answer. And regarding my question, and being fast, because I see we have 5 minutes, we are talking about a program that is already institutionalized because we are talking about not exactly the Happy Child program, but the Bolsa Familia has more than 10 years. We don't have political space to eliminate the program. What happened last year that they changed the program to another name and change a little bit about the program, but I know that next year have to negotiate that again, as the society will have to negotiate that again, because we are talking about the same program, the same government that first elaborated on Bolsa Familia. So we are kind of have a social protection scheme that is institutionalized, but not. And this original social protection scheme was always connected to children, having children being on school, children being vaccinated with the conditionalities. But this is quite a hot topic right now, because we for sure will see changes. We don't know if the Happy Child program will remain as it is. We don't know if the new Auxílio Brasil will remain as it is, probably not. And we also have some discussions regarding a universal basic income. And we have a law about it, even though we have nothing done yet. And the first some kind of public discussion go in a way that children should benefit from the universal basic income. Not everyone, because we do not have to have the fiscal space, but we could manage having children as benefits, as beneficiary of this universal basic income. Some suggestions go in a way to deliver some cash transfers at the end of the high school. So we have this kind of, but it's a hot topic. We will see, but for sure something will remain.
Excellent, great and clear answer, Samantha. We still have 2 minutes. I just wanted to ask, building on what you just said, so it looks like social protection, cash transfer is a really hot topic for the public and politically. I got a sense from your last slide that for the UN as well, for their joint new framework, cooperation framework, it's becoming potentially a one outcome, a joint outcome. So do you sense that more kind of UN engagement, more interest from the UN agency on social protection, this is also increasing, it's more coming? Would you say so, or what would be your reflection?
It was interesting because in Brazil, we already work a lot with the, as we used to call it, the people axis. And now we are talking about social inclusion axis. So the majority of our programs are already connected to this axis. But in the last discussions, we don't know if this is still will be signed as it is. But in the last discussion, we managed to put everything together, not like going through a long list of education, health, and everything, and putting social protection like this big umbrella.
In an
So
umbrella.
yeah, so I guess it was a kind of a mature discussion with the government and the UNCT of understanding the potentiality of the concept.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I think that'll be an excellent closing of this session. We have a few more seconds left, but thank you once again, Samantha, for preparing and delivering such an inspiring presentation. Not to say the least at this crazy time of the year. We really appreciate you. And
My pleasure.
Thank you everybody in the room for joining us and for the questions and the discussions. See you back in the plenary room. Yes, that's our homework for the new year holiday. Thank you so much.
It's more inspiring than I was able to deliver.
Whoa, that's a very high bar. It's a very high bar. But
Thank you.
I have no doubt. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
After all this time, you know, when we started using, you know, Zoom more during the pandemic, it's still amazing to see, you know, this kind of, you know, the process of people disappearing, going somewhere, coming back. Thank you very much. We realized, you know, the discussion could have continued for much longer. Apologies for shortening it a bit, but we may, you know, have also some of the comments here in the plenary. However, the intention now is to have each breakout room presented briefly, reported back to the plenary by one of the moderators. So each will have 2-3 minutes to basically tell us just the highlights, and also to emphasize, we are going to be sharing all the materials, including the presentations from the breakout rooms. We are also taking notes, and we are now experimenting, but it seems like we can actually record the breakout rooms as well. So we are trying to do that. So we may as well have a recording from each breakout room. So we'll share all these materials with you, of course, with the reports, with the first part. So colleagues will be able to learn what was discussed and shared. And of course, this is again, this is end of one chapter, but the beginning of the next one. So we will be continuing this conversation in a different setting. So may I ask one of the moderators from the first breakout room, expanding social protection coverage and financing, to give us the highlights.
Yes, thanks, Ned. I'll be doing that. So the first breakout room indeed was on social protection extension and financing. And Ned presented already how broad the portfolio was in terms of working on all the 3 dimensions of coverage extension, coverage of the population, the adequacy of the benefits, the comprehensiveness of risks covered, but also working on the policy framework, the financing and the delivery systems across all life cycle risks. And what impressed me really with the presentation from Malawi, it's not that joint programs then necessarily pick one or the other, but many programs actually worked across all the 3 dimensions of universal social protection and across policy or legal work, financing and delivery system. So in Malawi, we heard how on the policy legal side, there was great efforts being made to really institutionalize and increase coherence across the system. On the financing side, there is a lot of dependency still in Malawi in the social protection system, both for social assistance, but also for shock responses on donor financing. And so there was a great effort on providing the evidence, including to the parliament and to the decision makers, to really make the case for increasing domestic financing. And this is something also that cuts throughout this importance of the UN system providing evidence and really helping the countries to build the knowledge base to make good decisions. That came out very strongly, I thought, in the discussion. And then finally, on the delivery system, I think it was super interesting in Malawi how they built on the social protection system and to shift from a parallel delivery structure for emergency response by the UN system and the social protection system to use the existing social protection system and make that stronger and build it stronger, so that eventually emergency cash transfers could also be channeled through that, and so that the social protection system really was made much more able to respond to shocks, but also to plan for future shocks that are in Malawi. It's both hit by cyclical and recurrent hungry seasons, but also by emergency and unforeseen shocks. So I think these are some of the highlights of the very interesting discussion and presentations that we had in our session. I think just to wrap all of this up, it's really amazing what the program was able to do within 2 years, and nevertheless, it just really laid the foundations for now much more work that needs to be done to really ensure those, for example, mobilization of domestic resources for really domestic financing of social protection system, to really strengthen the delivery structures, etc. So, I mean, exactly what you just said in the beginning, Ned, this is not the end, but it's really a beginning of much more work that still needs to be done. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Veronica, and also special thanks for all your support from basically, I think, early 2019. So you've been with us throughout this whole journey, and then really appreciated your support, guidance, and then encouragement as well on this whole portfolio and for the joint programs. Thank you. So we are now moving to the next breakout room. So it's LNOB lenses in social protection, focusing on children.
Thanks,
Tom,
Ned.
over to you.
Yes, I'll be very brief, but it was a really inspiring session. We had Samantha from Brazil team, Resident Coordinator's Office, who was talking about joint UN support on the Happy Child program. So for me, the Joint SDG Fund, the first portfolio is about 4 things. It's about social protection, it's about integrated policy, it's about leaving no one behind, it's about UN working together. And I'm just checking if with Ned and Lisa's face if I'm getting this correct. And I think this Brazil team really hit all of the 4 topics so strongly. So on social protection, and I think it's linked with one of the largest cash transfer programs in the world, the Bolsa Familia, that with a new name, but the reach of this Happy Child program is 1.3 million children within the social protection system and coverage. So that's very impressive. Number 2, on integrated policy, it's not only cash transfers, but it's integrated with home visits, with other communication materials and support on knowledge and behaviors and practice on gender-based violence and violence against children. So there's an integration to support early child development there. Number 3, on leaving no one behind, although the reach itself is 1.3 million is really impressive, they had a specific focus on refugees, on migrant population, and also more increasingly on families with children with disability, which also came up through the implementation. So there was a very strong focus on not leaving anyone behind under this 1.3 million. And number 4, on UN working together, there was a big shout out. One of the quotes from the UN team there said, "This was the best joint program ever." Yes, Lisa, yes. So that came through like a lot of great collaboration. There was an important dedicated technical coordinator. I like the part that there was each agency did not split their activity or a product. All of them were kind of joined by different agencies, so that brought colleagues together. And I thought it was also interesting. They already was piloting this joint operational shared service center kind of approach. So operationally using long-term agreements, etc., that made it more smooth for UN to collaborate together. So that was really inspiring. Thanks again. Huge shout out to Samantha and the Brazil team. And if colleagues have chance to look through the presentation and the documentary, it will be very inspiring.
Thank you very much, Tomo. And Brazil was an interesting case for us because when we received the first concept note, we asked for 3 transformative results, and they said 1. Okay, so 1, and 1 is just to double the number of beneficiaries. And you can do that with $2 million, yes. And they delivered. So this is really one of the most amazing training programs that we've had. Thank you very much. So now moving to the breakout room on social protection and decent jobs. Dina.
Yes, hi. So we also had a very interesting session, albeit a bit too short, and we didn't necessarily, the discussion was very interesting, the presentation was great. We heard about the case of Vietnam, the joint program in Vietnam, a very successful program that aimed to achieve several major results, including, supporting the linking between social insurance and social assistance through the development of a multi-tiered social protection system. Of course, it aimed to make social protection more inclusive for groups that are obviously not sufficiently covered, with, of course, the ultimate aim of not leaving no one behind, as well as advocating for more equitable, effective, and increased investments in social protection. Not only did we hear about the lessons learned and the best practices, such as the importance of leveraging existing partnerships and partnerships at multiple level, but we also heard quite a bit about the challenges of working together, challenges of working in a fragmented context of social protection across many different institutions. And whereas, you know, we were able to make progress, or the program was able to make progress in terms of integrating our work across agencies, again, you have to walk a very tight rope when it comes to government agencies and ministries and institutions. I think I want to highlight also a couple of points very quickly on the discussion. One key element that we did discuss is how to address the needs of informal workers. There was a bit of an opportunity in the context of COVID-19, but I think the program itself highlighted even more so the need for addressing informal workers. And despite, you know, the push from the UN, it is not necessarily absorbed right away from the government. And then also another element that I wanted to highlight is also the transition, or this whole concept of graduating from social assistance. And again, looking at social assistance and employment, really discussions should not necessarily be just about graduation, but it's about supporting the individual with social protection even when they are employed. So these were some of the highlights. I think Christina also wanted to say something, but I think for the effect of time, we will wrap it up here.
Thank you very much, Dinah. And this is probably the strongest or the most direct link between a joint program and what the Global Accelerator might be doing in the future. And I have to say, we had only one single problem with joint program in Vietnam over all these years. We had too much to report on. And we just had, you know, every single paragraph we could put Vietnam and say something that they've done. So we had to kind of balance this particular joint with everyone else. Thank you so much. So we move to gender.
Wonderful. Can you hear me? Hi, wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you very much, Ned, for having us here. So we had a fabulous breakout on gender and social protection and looking at gender equality through the social protection lens. And we had a great presentation from the joint program in Mexico. And one thing that so as part of our discussion, we were sort of framing some of the findings that are going to be in the chapter. One finding of which was that all 35 of the joint programs integrated some element around gender, either in a gender sensitive lens or a gender responsive lens, in some cases gender transformative lenses. So that was a very positive achievement. However, even in spite of that, many of the programs did mention the difficulties in doing that directly through programming. So less than half of the programs, I think, were able to influence particular program iterations or adaptations to drive that forward. More impacts were seen in policy changes, and then about a quarter of the programs actually were able to implement new design. So many of them looked at existing programming and policies that were already in place. So recognizing that, wanted to kind of balance with hearing the great example from Mexico, with also thinking about where is the momentum, where could we further go, and how can we stretch the bounds and possibilities. And so particularly for the joint program in Mexico, we heard a fabulous account of kind of two major results. One around increasing adequacy and coverage for domestic workers, where there's an expansion to 50,000 additional domestic workers being able to be reached by the social protection program. And then also integrating unpaid care work and the recognition of care as a fourth pillar, a fourth core pillar within the social protection system within the country. So those were two major achievements. And just to highlight a few things that were mentioned, one was around what it really took to galvanize support for integrating domestic workers, particularly when many domestic workers, that sector is seen as quite feminized, and there's quite many women who are engaged in that sector. So it wasn't necessarily recognized as a form of employment. But by actually demonstrating what the benefits of domestic workers were to households, both for men and women, so thinking about there are many male-dominated sectors such as gardeners, such as drivers, etc., by kind of expanding that definition, making it more inclusive, they were able to actually drive forward more of the rights-based discussion around domestic workers and their integration into social protection. There were also a lot of achievements around social campaigns that were done specifically to kind of galvanize interest and understanding of why there are rights for domestic workers and why they're as entitled to social protection as those who might be in more of the formal employment sector. So I know multiple times today we've heard people talk about the informal economy, how do we expand more access to the informal economy? So that was a great accomplishment for doing that. And then finally, for just really driving home the need to recognize care and care services as a core element of social protection that needs to be provided. One really interesting point that was raised was around the challenges of interagency collaboration and how to overcome those. So challenges as basic as operational considerations. What if we all define social protection slightly differently? So then how do we use the fund as kind of a catalytic moment for us to come together and really force ourselves to work together as a joint entity? And that was very successful in Mexico. And that it seemed that this joint fund was a particular concrete opportunity that really compelled agencies to specifically focus on this area around care, around domestic workers, to actually drive forward the agenda. So kudos and hats off to the joint SDG fund. It sounds like there's going to be a lot more coming out of Mexico and other countries to come as a result of this. So that is the report back. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. And Mexico was really, we often talk about, results, but there's so much that has been produced also in terms of the processes. I still remember we had one of the communities of practice meetups, and Mexico was presenting an amazing costing methodology, right? So we talk about results, and that's important, but there's so much that actually was done to produce these results. And this costing methodology was taken over by a couple of other joint programs as well. And of course, Mexico was indeed strongly pushing us with their success in this joint program to pay more attention to the care economy. And that was for some in our kind of broader global community so unknown that we, when you say care systems, care economy, people say, what do you mean by that? So it was really, really unknown. So Mexico helped us go more into this direction. And now one of the 3 priorities for job creation of the Global Accelerator, besides green jobs and digital jobs, are jobs in the care economy or domestic workers and this whole ecosystem. Thank you so much. So now we move to the shock response social protection, COVID and the triple crisis. So we put all the crises together.
Hi, everyone. And I don't even know where to start because it was such a great presentation that we had in that group. And the presentation was on the work in Philippines. For me, Philippines is also very, it rings a lot of bells for me because there were a lot of things that were started in Philippines from a shock responsive perspective globally. So it's really kind of a trailblazer country from where I sit. So that's why, from that perspective, it was great. But just stepping back, out of all the joint programs that we had, I think out of the 30 plus, we had 29 of them working on shock responsive social protection, and out of those, 16 actually responded to the COVID crises, either expanding or supporting governments to adjust. And Philippines, of course, is one of those countries. What is very interesting that came out from the Philippines example is the fact that this joint program brought various partners who were earlier working on their own programs around shock responsive social protection to come together. And not only to come together, but to come and support the government. Because as you know, shock responsive elements can become very standalone and direct delivery oriented. And so this program saw that shift of agencies doing their own little thing, coming together to support the government and putting government in the driving seat. So that's point number 1, which was a big learning. The other was that within Philippines, there's already been a lot of work around embedding shock responsive social protection within the social protection system building efforts within the country. But there are pockets that are left out. And the concept of leaving no one behind was literally taken to towards a localized approach in the Philippines, bringing the local government to the fore. So we're talking about the BARRM region within Philippines in Mindanao, where the joint program focused
on working with the local government, bringing them on the fore, working on their policies, and following a systems approach to social protection with in such a complex kind of a context, working on data collection, working on tools, leveraging that to influence policies, embedding shock responsive social protection, not only in social protection, but the other way, in shock responsive social protection in the DRR policies, which is something, usually that doesn't happen. It's always the other way around. So that then targeting approaches, working on the information systems, strengthening the MIS within the government system. So overall, it was quite an interesting example of how agencies can work together and what can be done with the local government. And the last point that I want to make is what I found very interesting is the embedding of humanitarian tools into the work that we do in social protection. So things like vulnerability analysis and mapping, which is usually done a lot in the humanitarian side to design programs, that is something which was embedded into the program. Anticipatory action, which is something more of a concept in the disaster risk management world, was brought into the social protection realm. The processes around early warning systems, building them into the social protection programming and design is my third key point. And the last point came out from a very little discussion. I must be honest, we did not have a lot of time for discussion, but what did come out was from Malawi that this project, the joint program, brought agencies to work together, and again, reiterating the first point that I was making, that it brought agencies together to support the government to build common good. And in the case of Malawi, it's a common grievance mechanism, or common call center for grievance redressal. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you with a hope that there is going to be a new chapter to this SDG fund, focusing on shock responsive social protection. So back to you, Nenad.
Thank you very much, Nupur. Shock responsive social protection is this another quote-unquote niche area that became really dominant. I think we started with probably less than a dozen of joint programs that incorporate this into the initial design. We had, of course, the amazing work in the Philippines, but also Mongolia, Malawi, Rwanda, Barbados, and Santa Lucia, and a couple of others. And then this was indeed, as you say, Nupur, something that came out of DRR, and an interesting combination, right, of all different kinds of, I would say, also cultures in terms of, policy and programs. But then the COVID happened. And as I mentioned in the introduction, and you have more on this in the report, other programs start being curious about this. Now, one thing that, and now with the Global Accelerator, there's reference to the triple crisis, cost of living crisis, there are all these kind of things. So crisis is now almost the name of the game. And as I kept being reminded by ILO, any social protection system should be adaptive and shock responsive. However, we need to figure out how to do that. And I think a separate chapter for probably people here in this particular room is more of the technical. And there was we already in, I think, September or October of 2020, we had the very first conference on this portfolio. And that was to showcase shock response social protection at the socialprotection.org global conference. And there was one comment that was made, Christina from UNICEF, and I don't think we have the response to this. And this is very technical. Shock response social protection primarily came from DRR, but how do we manage multiple crises? Methodologically speaking, conceptually speaking, I think this is a, again, maybe technical chapter that needs to remain open for all of us to figure out, because now we have, 2-3 different crises interacting, and even the original idea of shock responsive social protection might not be able to accommodate it methodologically, and then in terms of these kind of multiplier results. Thank you so much. Last but not the least, for sure, and it actually started first in our design because one of the first mini guidance that we produced was actually on how to manage human rights mechanisms Brianna and Antonio from this year helped us a lot. They produced a checklist, they mapped out all human rights mechanisms. And I suppose the joint programs were a bit surprised that we were asking that, but they did a great work in design and actually they followed through. So please let us know on this particular breakout session, what were the highlights. I think Alex, who really helped us so much in the past couple of months to try to make sense of this whole portfolio with regards to human rights and in particular disability.
Thank you very much, Ned. The whole event is actually really fascinating. To get this bird view of everything that has been achieved is really fantastic. And as you said, I think when you talk about social protection and you talk about human rights, sometimes it doesn't click immediately, but actually it's very mutually reinforcing agenda and work. And we can see that a human rights approach is essential in social protection if we really want to make sure that the furthest behind are put first. And one of the groups that come across region and countries as furthest behind as definitely person with disabilities, which is why we focused during this group work on that. And we can see different vector that the joint fund has supported to make sure that human rights are fostered and that the group furthest behind, such as person with disabilities, are really taken into consideration. The first one, I think, is really about making the case, bringing the voice, raising the profile of those groups. And we see, for instance, that more than half of the countries have worked specifically on more evidence and data on person with disabilities, and nearly all countries have worked on data around marginalized groups to higher the profile. Another essential aspect is really participation, ensuring that the voice of people that are from those marginalized groups actually are heard and are an integral part of the discussion on social protection reform. And when it talks about a person with disabilities, we have great example, of course, from Georgia, which was our core presentation, but also from Lebanon. And we know from the report that several other countries did that work too. Coming to the system strengthening to bring more support, we see different aspects. The legal aspect, which is essential because you will have social protection legislation, but you have also specific groups related legislation, such as disability related legislation, social code, child code, and others. And those different legislation are an opportunity to strengthen social protection support from those different groups. So having really a social protection approach together with a human rights based approach is extremely important to make the most of all those opportunities. In terms of work in the system, they were focused on helping better identification of marginalized groups. Here in the specific case, a person with disabilities. Also, how do we prioritize those groups and trying to make sure that whether it's in the work specifically on cash for children, or if it's for working age adult in terms of access to job, or making sure that women with disabilities are benefiting from the work on gender-based violence. This twin track approach to really ensure that the support is reaching person with disabilities in their diversities. So having both a disability angle and a gender equality angle was something really important. One of the points also that was raised is, and I think it is essential, is that if you talk about a group like person with disabilities and the right to social protection, it can be in some countries where the human rights space is shrinking. It can be a way to continue for the UN system, the conversation with the government and move forward. And I think that Georgia is really an excellent example of and we had a great presentation from David and colleagues to see all the different entry points that you can have in a system to foster inclusion of person with disability and bringing a rights-based approach. And I don't think this would be possible without a joint program like the SDG fund. And I think the Georgia example really illustrates that. I think there is a lot more we have to learn from everything that has been done. We will have the report, but we need to dig more. We need to dig more because so much have been done. I just heard more from Brazil, and I'm sure that we can extract more of those lessons learned about how do we make sure that nobody is left behind and how the further behind are put first. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Alex. Georgia is an excellent example of why one of the lessons learned for the Joint SDG Fund was that we need much more technical support from the agencies. And that's not to spread money at the global level. This is really to help the design, but even interpretation of the progress. So I remember it was probably the first annual progress report that we received from joint programs and also from Georgia. We at the Secretariat of the Joint SDG Fund, none of us having substantive background on disability, concluded this is a good report, but couldn't go beyond that. And I know we sent it to Brianna, and she said, well, this is the most amazing thing, but we don't know that, and we don't know what to do with it. So Alex came, later to help us. So going forward, and that's probably a good segue for Lisa for the closing of the event, is that in the future thematic windows, we really need more substantive involvement of our agencies, and not to replace what's happening at the country level. This is still the locus of where the investments are made, where the funding is spent. But really to help us guide the process and make the best of it, not just to have aggregate data at the global level, but really to leverage what's happening in one country for other countries, but also to be able to articulate, and as I think Alex said on disability, dig deeper and better understand not only what happened, but how can we jointly at the country level, regional, global levels, move on certain agenda with lessons learned, with emerging practices, with innovation. So with that, thank you very much, everyone. Sorry for the short time. I suppose we could have gone for probably 2 hours. Again, the conversation should continue. But for this particular event, I'm giving the floor to Lisa to close with the final remarks on some of the way forward thinking and initiatives that we are now considering. Over to you, Lisa.
Ned, thank you so much, and thank you to all of the colleagues who gave these fascinating readouts. It seems like each room was more enthused than the one before, so it really has been a very, very exciting event today. So, and not all events, we've been on these Zoom calls now for a couple of years, so I think it does speak to what we are trying to be, a sea change in how we all work together, a supportive, collaborative context environment where the best of the UN really does, take us to results and impact at scale. And to Ned's point, we really intend for this first portfolio to remain foundational through the life of the fund, which has a sunset of 2030. So as our demand for impact and reckoning with the great challenge of reaching the SDGs next year, how can we now start to use all of you as a resource as we look at the other thematic priorities? Why? Because we know social protection is such a foundational, but also such an accelerator for so many other areas. So from food systems to digital, to internally displaced, to clean and just transitions for energy, to localization of the SDGs. What does that mean in terms of access to services and social protection at the local level? So many aspects that we will be tackling, and colleagues, it can only be done properly with all of you. So as Ned leads the incubation of these windows, right? A concept note, agencies coming together within their mandates, and then looking for ways to sort of intersectorially, move it forward. The investment strategies, which is how we're making sure not just our member states, but the private sector are embedded in those. That's all been moving really throughout 2022. The target now, as we begin to launch these windows, is to make sure that the entirety of the development system understands and knows us. There is a bit of a dominance at the moment for the agencies that know us through our calls to proposals to date, and they don't necessarily reflect all 50 of the agencies, funds, and programs. So we are looking to diversify that. And to that point, the governance structure, which at the moment is led by UNDP, as you know, Hao Liang, who opened our meeting, and is supported by UNFPA, ILO, UNICEF, and WFP, there'll be a rotation of those agencies. Why? Because the fund belongs to all of the parts of the development system, and it shouldn't feel as if because you're not on the steering committee or because you're not necessarily at the regular meetings that you're not part of this development. And we're trying to expand the circle. There will be an effort to roadshow the Joint Fund 2.0 in Q1 of next year. That means, you know, the new governance structure. That means these 7 thematic priorities, all to make sure that we are connecting the dots, and that these great examples from Georgia, from Mexico, from the Philippines, you know, don't sort of stay only in this social protection world of ours that we've built and that you all are perpetuating and moving forward, but into the other conversations as well. I mean, if we think about, you know, risk reduction, if we think about risk prevention, if we think about risk responsive, that has to be across all of our programming, because look what the world of the last 3 years has shown us. You know, 2 global events that I don't think anyone would have predicted that are absolutely impacting the most vulnerable every day now. So we're very excited to articulate that, to explore that, to understand what are the governance mechanisms that will make this work best. All of that's going to be literally built with and for, and hopefully together with you in Q1. We also are thrilled that the Deputy Secretary General continues to weave us in to these higher level conversations. As you know, our development emergency modality was linked to the SDGs Global Crisis Response Group, which was a global effort to understand the impacts on food, fuel, and energy across the Ukraine crisis. So when we're starting to see, it's a tribute to your work that the SG wants us to be that vehicle, because the vehicle is you, right? I mean, we are barely 6 staff inside the fund, and very few are core staff, right? We're piecing together what you know as the Secretariat, because you are the experts and you are the ones moving this forward. So please keep an eye on your inboxes. This large group, and we thank everyone for making this time today and for staying along with us. This group will become a resource to these ongoing conversations, because not so much of the thematic area, but because of the process, right? And obviously we're always looking to lighten that, to improve that, to make sure that you feel that the Joint Fund is making things easier, not harder, right? That so the vehicle itself also, right? Just like, you know, we're seeing the best in new you know, electric vehicles and, you know, self-driving, et cetera. So let's hope we kind of go into the new year making the fund even more efficient, energy efficient for you, so that it's not a heavy lift to engage through the fund, but also that we can share out as well. And I really want to make sure I congratulate again Ned and Maya and the wider Joint Fund team who are also on the line, because it really has been, for me, I began in the fund when this call had already been launched, and I was part of that process then, where we went down, you know, from those 113 down to those 35, and how we did that, and all of that development. It's a lot of the trade craft we're trying to develop for the fund started with this portfolio, and you're part of that, and that is going to be institutionalized in the best way we can, and we're going to leave behind what we didn't like, and so please know that you are part of that, and we really, really appreciate you. It is 12 o'clock. We're all very busy. It is the holidays. There's lots to do. So congratulations again, colleagues. We really look forward to hearing and seeing how the Global Accelerator is going to build on these efforts. Yes, Pathfinder countries, but beyond, because we're not going to forget about those who aren't Pathfinders. This work will continue to be leveraged. We welcome your support as we engage member states on these areas, because these voices have to be the ones that showcase the validity and the role of the fund. So don't be surprised if you get invited to wider engagements to that effect, so that we can go forward together. So thank you again. I'm delighted, Ned. If anything else, then we can close, right? And we can let everyone go on to their day. Wonderful. So thank you so much. Round of applause. Simply the best. Tina Turner's in my mind. Simply the best. So everyone stay well and happy holidays.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.